Most people think successful people make fewer mistakes. In reality, they simply make better decisions after each mistake. The biggest difference isn't intelligence or talent. It's the ability to see reality without letting emotions, pride, or wishful thinking get in the way. Ray Dalio built one of the world's most successful investment firms by following that idea. And in this audiobook, you'll discover the principles that guided every major decision he made. Stay until the end, because learning to think differently may be the most valuable skill you'll ever develop. And before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new audiobooks. And now, let's begin.
Introduction. Ray Dalio is one of the most successful investors in history, and one of the few who turned his approach to decision-making into a system others could actually use. For more than 50 years, he operated in environments where errors could be extremely costly. The principles he eventually wrote down were not developed in a classroom or a journal. They emerged from real situations, often after something went wrong. This book presents 30 rules drawn from that body of work. They address how to see reality clearly, how to make decisions under uncertainty, how to work with people, how to learn from failure, and how to build systems that hold up over time. They are meant to be used in practice, not simply read and set aside. Dalio spent decades writing down and refining these ideas. He noticed recurring patterns in markets, in organizations, in the behavior of individuals under pressure. He recorded his mistakes, analyzed outcomes, and turned what he learned into principles he applied himself and passed on to his teams. That process, continuous, methodical, and unusually candid about failure, became the foundation of the work this book draws from. From that larger body of ideas, we have selected and distilled 30 rules that seem most broadly applicable. These are not limited to finance or business. They apply wherever careful thinking and deliberate action matter. Each rule stands on its own. You can open the book to any one of them, read it, and find a practical way to apply it. There is no required sequence. This book is intended as a reference rather than a course. You can return to a given rule when it becomes relevant, before a difficult decision, during a conflict, or at a moment of transition. Each time, you may find a useful way to think about what you are facing. The principles collected here represent our best effort to make Dalio's approach accessible and usable. The rest is up to you. Part 1. Principles and Truth. Rule 1. Accept reality as it is, not as you wish it were. The rule: when you base a decision on a distorted view of reality, the result is more likely to be distorted too. Many people avoid parts of reality that feel threatening or uncomfortable. They look at their finances and tell themselves things will improve next month. They watch a relationship deteriorate and decide it is just a difficult period. They receive feedback they dislike and conclude the other person simply does not understand. None of this is optimism. It is a way of managing discomfort in the short term while allowing the actual problem to grow. You have probably recognized this in yourself. There is a moment when something tells you that a situation is not what you would like it to be, and you choose quietly not to look too closely. That gap between what is and what you are willing to see tends to widen over time. The longer it stays open, the harder it becomes to face the truth later, and the fewer options you have when you finally do. Why it works. You can only act effectively when you understand the situation you are actually in. Consider driving with a screen in place of a windshield, one that shows a clear, smooth road, while the real road ahead has sharp turns and unexpected obstacles. A mind guided by wishful thinking works much the same way. Decisions get made based on a picture that does not match reality, and each one tends to carry you further from where you want to be. When you look at a situation without softening it or waiting for it to resolve on its own, you get a clearer sense of what you are actually dealing with. That clarity does not guarantee easy answers, but it does mean your choices are based on something real. Seeing things honestly may be uncomfortable at first, but it tends to make life more manageable over time. You stop spending energy on maintaining a version of events that does not hold up, and you direct that energy toward actions that can actually change the situation. People who are willing to face difficulty directly are often able to respond sooner and more effectively than those who avoid it. Not because honesty is pleasant, but because it gives you something accurate to work with. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Whenever you catch yourself thinking, "It's not that bad," or "Things will sort themselves out," stop and ask, what do the facts actually show, separate from what I am hoping for? 2. Try describing any important situation as an outside observer would, without justification or emotion, just what has actually happened. 3. Ask someone you trust, "What do you see here that I might be missing?" Then listen without defending yourself. 4. Before a significant decision, write down 3 things you find uncomfortable, but that directly affect the outcome. Make sure your plan accounts for them. 5. Try to treat unwelcome information as something useful rather than something threatening. It tells you where attention is actually needed. Common mistake. Many people here accept reality and understand it as resignation, a kind of defeat. It is not. Accepting reality means stopping the effort that goes into denial and redirecting it towards something more productive. You are not agreeing that things must stay as they are. You are acknowledging what is actually true right now, so that you can respond to it, rather than to a more comfortable version of it. Those who treat any recognition of difficulty as giving up tend to stay in patterns that do not serve them, sometimes for years. Genuine steadiness is not the ability to ignore what is unpleasant. It is the ability to see it clearly, without being undone by it, and then respond calmly and with better judgment than you would have otherwise. Result: serious problems rarely improve because you stop looking at them. They usually become harder to solve. Every period spent avoiding what is real is time that could have been used to address it. See the situation as it is, and you have something solid to work from. A comfortable illusion may be easier in the moment, but a clear view is more useful over time. Rule 2. Pain plus reflection equals progress. Learn from what hurts. The rule. Unexamined pain often turns into a repeated mistake. Everyone experiences failure, loss, rejection, and disappointment. But watch how people tend to respond when something goes badly. One person loses money on a poor investment and throws themselves into the next opportunity mainly to stop thinking about the last one. Another ends a relationship and is in a strikingly similar one within a week. A third receives criticism from a manager and spends the evening venting to friends rather than considering whether any of it was worth taking seriously. The urge to move past discomfort quickly is understandable, but that urge is often what turns a single setback into a recurring pattern. You have probably seen this in people around you, those who seem to repeat the same mistake in different situations, in work, in relationships, in everyday choices. They are not necessarily unlucky or unusually unaware. They simply do not stay with the difficulty long enough to take anything useful from it. The pain arrives, they move on, and the underlying problem remains. It tends to return. In a different situation, with different details, but with the same structure. Why it works. Pain can be a signal, one that points to where your thinking, your behavior, or your assumptions came into conflict with reality. Think of the warning lights on a car's dashboard. When one comes on, covering it with tape does not solve anything. It just removes the information. If you pause after a setback and ask yourself what actually led you there, you may begin to find something more useful than the raw discomfort. A clearer sense of which decision was flawed, which assumption did not hold, or which pattern you have been repeating without noticing. Books and advice can help, but your own examined experience often changes behavior more deeply. Reading about a mistake is different from having made it, sat with it, and understood it. Reflection connected to real experience is often more powerful than reflection in the abstract. It is harder to dismiss and harder to forget. That is the core of the formula. Pain alone produces only suffering. Reflection in the abstract tends to stay theoretical. But when genuine difficulty becomes the subject of honest examination, the result is understanding that tends to hold. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When you are feeling the sting of a failure or disappointment, resist the urge to distract yourself immediately. Give yourself a day or two to sit with it before moving on. 2. After any significant setback, write down answers to 3 questions. What actually happened? What decision or action of mine contributed to it? What will I do differently next time? 3. Keep a separate notebook or document where you record only mistakes and what you took from them. Read it back once a month and look for recurring patterns. 4. Before looking for external causes, make sure you have honestly examined your own contribution to the situation. Even when outside circumstances genuinely worked against you, there is usually something within your own choices that is worth looking at. 5. Talk about your failures with people who will respond honestly, rather than simply reassure you. That kind of conversation is often where real understanding develops. Common mistake. Many people fall into one of 2 habits. They move past the pain so quickly that they take nothing from it, or they stay in it so long that reflection shades into self-punishment. Both tend to destroy whatever the experience might have offered. Reflection is not the same as replaying what went wrong in an endless loop. It is a more deliberate process. Ask clear questions, reach clear answers, and form a concrete intention for next time. If a week after a setback, you are still dwelling on it but have not written down a single observation, you are probably not reflecting. You are simply suffering. Suffering without any structure does not tend to produce progress. It produces exhaustion and a growing sense that nothing can be changed. Result: pain you move through consciously tends to inform better decisions. Pain you avoid tends to repeat itself. The difference often comes down to a pause and a few honest questions. Rule 3. Write down your principles. Create rules to live by. The rule. An insight that goes unrecorded is a lesson that becomes harder to recover, and the experience behind it is easier to misread the next time. By the time most people reach their 30s or 40s, they have been through dozens of situations that taught them something. Failed projects, poor decisions, conflicts, financial losses, things that worked when they expected them not to. All of it leaves some kind of mark. But ask someone to name 3 lessons from the past 5 years, and most will pause. Not because nothing happened, because they never clarified what they had learned. They sensed something at the time, but never put it into words. 6 months later, a similar situation arrives, and they approach it as though they had never faced anything like it before. Without a clearly stated rule, they can examine or adjust, without reference to what came before. You have probably noticed this in yourself as well as in others. Most people draw conclusions from experience, but almost nobody turns those conclusions into something they can return to when it matters. Knowledge held only in memory is unreliable. Memory simplifies, distorts, and fades. What remains of a difficult experience is often just a vague sense that something like this has come up before. Why it works. Consider 2 craftsmen working in the same trade over 10 years. The first has accumulated genuine experience, techniques tried, errors made, approaches that work reliably. None of it is written down. The second is less experienced, but keeps a notebook, recording after significant jobs what worked, what did not, and what he would do differently. After several years, the second has something he can examine, share, and revise. The first relies on intuition, which may be genuinely valuable, but is difficult to test, explain, or pass on. The point is not that the notebook makes the second craftsman better. An experienced person without notes may still outperform a less experienced one with them. The value of writing is different. It makes reflection possible, and reflection is what turns raw experience into something transferable. A written principle behaves differently from a thought kept only in your head. When you put a conclusion into words, you are forced to be specific. The vague intention to be more careful with money becomes something like, never put more than 20% of available funds into a single investment, a rule you can test, revise, and apply when appropriate, rather than a feeling that may or may not surface when you need it. Written principles also make improvement possible. You can return to them, check whether they still hold, sharpen the wording, add exceptions based on new experience. Each new situation does not start from zero. It builds on what you have already examined. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Create a dedicated document or notebook, a personal record of conclusions you have drawn from experience. Treat it as something you will add to and revise over time, not something to finish. 2. After any significant experience, a success, a failure, or a difficult decision, write down what you took from it as a specific rule. Not be more careful, but something like always read the terms of an agreement before signing, even when you trust the other party. 3. Read through your principles at least once a month. This helps you notice which ones you are actually following and which you have quietly set aside. 4. When facing a serious decision, check your list before thinking through the problem from scratch. Look for a principle that applies and start there. 5. Every 6 months, revisit the wording. Your understanding changes, and the principles should reflect what you have actually learned rather than what you believed when you first wrote them down. Common mistake. Many people try to produce a complete and well-formed set of principles from the start, and because of that, they never begin. They wait until they feel ready to write something genuinely worthwhile. But principles rarely arrive in finished form. They start rough, approximate, sometimes wrong, and that is expected. The value is not in producing a perfect rule. It is in the habit of recording conclusions and returning to them. A first attempt may be clumsy, but it is already more useful than nothing because it gives you something to examine and correct. Those who wait for the right conditions tend to remain without any record at all. Those who start with something imperfect at least have material to work with. Result? Experience that is not reflected on or recorded is easier to lose or misapply. Write down your conclusions, put them in the form of rules, return to them, and keep refining them. And over time, you will have a framework built not on borrowed ideas, but on what you have actually worked through yourself. Rule 4. Radical honesty. Tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The rule: relationships built on polite silence may last longer than those built on outright lies, but they can still erode. Consider how communication often works. A colleague presents a weak proposal and everyone nods along. A friend is about to make a decision that looks likely to fail and nobody says so. A business partner makes a mistake and you stay quiet because this does not feel like the right moment. A manager asks the team for input and everyone says they agree, even though several people in the room can see the problem clearly. People tend to describe this as tact or sensitivity, or simply not wanting to make things awkward. But look at what it actually produces over time. The colleague keeps producing weak work because nobody pointed to the specific problems. The friend may lose money without ever hearing the warning that might have helped. The partner repeats the same mistake because they never knew they made one. The team drifts toward a bad outcome because nobody said what they were thinking. Many acts of polite silence carry a cost in someone's time, money, or opportunity. Sometimes the relationship itself suffers precisely because the truth arrived much later than it should have. You can probably think of a situation where someone stayed quiet for a long time, And when you finally learned what they had been thinking, your first reaction was not relief. It was frustration that nobody had told you sooner. Why it works. Polite dishonesty can create a temporary sense of ease while quietly removing the thing people actually need: accurate information about themselves and their choices. Imagine asking for directions in an unfamiliar city, and everyone you ask tells you what sounds reassuring rather than what is accurate. You feel fine, and with every step you move further from where you need to be. The person who stops you and says you are heading the wrong way may cause a moment of irritation, but they are the only one who actually helps. Honesty in relationships can work similarly. It is not always comfortable in the moment, but it is one of the clearest ways to help the people around you make decisions based on reality rather than on a softened version of events meant to protect their feelings. When you tell the truth, directly, specifically, and without hostility, you are less likely to damage the relationship and more likely to strengthen it over time. Trust is not built through mutual reassurance. It develops when people feel confident that someone will tell them what is actually true, even when it would be easier not to. Relationships with that quality tend to hold up under pressure. Others often do not. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Before any significant conversation, ask yourself, am I about to say what I actually think or what this person would prefer to hear? Try to say what you actually think. 2. Frame honest feedback around specific facts and observations rather than judgments. Not, you are not handling this well, but there were 3 specific problems in the last project, and here is what they were. 3. Start with people you already trust. Agree with 1 or 2 of them that you will speak honestly with each other without unnecessary softening, and that neither of you will treat directness as an attack. 4. When you hear something uncomfortable about yourself, pause before responding. The person who chose to tell you took a risk. That is worth acknowledging before you react. 5. If saying something directly feels difficult, try writing it out first. Read it back, check that it is specific and not unkind, and then decide whether to send it or say it in person. 6. Do not use honesty as a way to wound someone or to feel superior. The point is to give the other person information they can actually use, not to relieve your own discomfort at their expense. Common mistake. Many people hear about radical honesty and conclude it means saying whatever they think in any form at any moment. And they call this being direct. They speak bluntly, without considering how it will be received, and seem surprised when people withdraw from them. But radical honesty is not a license for tactlessness. It is the ability to say something difficult in a way the other person can actually hear and work with. If the people around you consistently respond by becoming defensive and closing off, the problem may be your delivery, or the relationship may not yet be ready for that level of honesty. Either way, it is worth examining. Real directness requires effort. The difference is where the effort goes, not toward hiding the truth, but toward expressing it in a way that is more likely to help than to harm. That distinction tends to separate people who are trusted from people who are kept at a distance. Result: the truth, offered at the right moment and without contempt, tends to strengthen relationships, professional and personal alike. Dishonesty dressed as kindness may feel easier in the short term, but it usually creates a larger problem later. The discomfort of an honest conversation is almost always more manageable than the cost of avoiding it. Rule 5. Ego and blind spots, your biggest obstacles. The rule: the more certain a person is that they are right, the more likely they are to miss their own mistakes. Most workplaces and families have someone like this. At work, it might be the manager who pushes through a decision even when the team can see it is headed toward failure. At home, it might be the partner with whom any attempt to raise a problem ends with, "I'm already doing everything right." Among friends, it might be the person who, after every setback, finds the cause somewhere outside themselves. The market, the timing, other people, bad luck. Never themselves. You probably recognize this. You may even recognize it in yourself, in certain situations or certain moods. That is not unusual, because most people share the same instinct. There is something in each of us that protects our self-image automatically. Information that fits how we see ourselves, competent, fair, clear-headed, is accepted easily. Information that contradicts it gets filtered out, reframed, or attributed to outside causes. Alongside this, most people have areas they consistently misread. One person does not notice how their tone affects those around them. Another overestimates their ability in a particular area. A third keeps ending up in the same kind of conflict, each time genuinely convinced the problem lies with someone else. These are blind spots. They are difficult to identify on your own. That is precisely what makes them blind. Why it works. Imagine driving with the side mirrors covered. The road ahead looks clear and you feel in control. But every time you change lanes, you are taking a risk. There may be another car right beside you that you simply cannot see. Ego and blind spots work similarly. Ego tells you that your picture of a situation is complete and accurate. Blind spots hide whatever does not fit that picture. Together, they create a particular kind of problem. You act with confidence, but on the basis of incomplete information. What makes this especially difficult is that success tends to reinforce it. The more things have gone well, the easier it becomes to feel that your way of thinking is reliably sound. But that is often when the vulnerability is greatest. The most practical way to compensate for blind spots is to let other people show you what you cannot see on your own, not as advisors or as sources of reassurance, but as a way of accessing what your own perspective cannot reach. When 3 different people tell you the same thing, it is probably worth taking seriously, even if your instinct is to dismiss it. And when someone points to a mistake, and your immediate response is irritation and the urge to defend yourself, that reaction is worth examining. Some of the most useful feedback may be the hardest to accept, though not all hard feedback is accurate. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When someone tells you something uncomfortable about your behavior or a decision you made, pause before responding. When possible, return to it later, once the initial reaction has settled. 2. Find 2 or 3 people from different parts of your life whose judgment you trust, and every few months ask them directly, "What do you see in me that I probably don't notice myself?" 3. Each time your first reaction to criticism is defensiveness or irritation, treat that as a cue to examine the feedback more carefully. Not necessarily to accept it, but to look at it more honestly before deciding. 4. Keep a brief record of decisions that did not produce the result you expected, and look for a repeating element. If the same type of mistake appears 3 or more times, it is probably a pattern worth examining. 5. Before making an important decision, ask yourself, am I choosing this because it is genuinely the better option, or because it protects how I see myself? Common mistake. Some people, once they become aware of the problem, start visibly agreeing with everyone and accepting all criticism without evaluation, as a way of appearing open-minded. But this is not a solution. It is a different version of the same thing. Now the self-image being protected is, I am humble and receptive. The real work is not about abandoning your own judgment. It is about being willing to test it against other perspectives and to change it when the evidence shows you were wrong. Not every piece of criticism is accurate. Not every outside opinion is worth following. But if you automatically dismiss anything that makes you uncomfortable, you remain stuck in one way. If you automatically accept all of it, you are stuck in another. The point is to examine each observation without deciding in advance how you want it to turn out, and to reach a conclusion based on what the facts actually show. Result: no one sees a complete picture on their own. Everyone has areas they consistently misread or overlook. Let other people show you what your own perspective cannot reach, and take uncomfortable feedback seriously enough to examine it rather than deflect it. You are likely to make better decisions than someone who assumes their own view is complete. Part 2. Making decisions. Rule 6. Don't confuse what you want with what is true. Facts matter more than hopes. The rule: a decision grounded in evidence and clear reasoning is usually stronger than one driven mainly by hope. Someone starts a business and puts together a financial plan. The plan shows optimistic sales figures, a rapidly growing customer base, and a path to profit within 6 months. They believe these numbers, not because research or testing supports them, but because they want them to be true. 8 months later, the money runs out, and they genuinely cannot understand what went wrong. What went wrong was there from the start. They confused what they wanted with the evidence they actually had. And every decision that followed rested on a picture that existed only in their mind. This pattern appears in many forms. Someone stays in a relationship that stopped working years ago because they are convinced things will change eventually. An employee remains in a job where they feel overlooked, certain that their contribution will be recognized sooner or later. An investor holds a losing position, sure the price will recover. In each case, what the person wants to be true has quietly taken the place of what is actually true. The decisions that follow are built on that shifted foundation. You have probably felt this yourself. The moment when the facts are pointing one way, and you want to believe something different, and you choose the belief because the truth is inconvenient. Why it works. Emotional reactions often arrive before careful analysis. Hope, desire, and anxiety shape how you see a situation before any deliberate thinking has begun. It is a little like wearing tinted lenses. You are looking at the world but in altered colors, and you may not notice because you have always seen it that way. When you want a deal to succeed, you tend to notice the arguments in its favor and discount the ones against it. When you hope a project will work, the optimistic scenarios feel more plausible and the cautious ones feel overstated. This is not a flaw in character. It is simply how perception tends to work under pressure. That is why good intentions to stay objective are rarely enough on their own. What helps more is the habit of checking your assumptions against evidence before committing to a direction. A fact is something that can be checked, observed, measured, or independently confirmed. It does not change based on whether you find it convenient. When you build a decision on that kind of ground, you have something stable to stand on. When you build it on hope alone, you are working with something that may shift at any point. People who regularly separate what they know from what they want do not become emotionally flat or cynical. They simply make decisions from a clearer starting point, one that reflects what is actually there rather than what they are hoping for. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Before any significant decision, write out 2 columns, what I know for certain and what I want to believe. Put each piece of relevant information into one column or the other, as honestly as you can. 2. Ask yourself, if I had no preference about the outcome, if I genuinely did not care either way, what would the same information lead me to conclude? 3. Find someone who has no emotional stake in your decision, lay out the facts for them, and ask for their assessment. A perspective without personal investment often sees what yours cannot. 4. When possible, avoid making significant decisions during moments of strong enthusiasm or excitement. Wait a day, let the feeling settle, and return to the question when you are thinking more steadily. 5. Periodically review your past predictions and expectations. Compare what you anticipated with what actually happened. This is one of the more reliable ways to notice where your judgment tends to be consistently over-optimistic or inaccurate. Common mistake. Many people assume that separating fact from wish means becoming a pessimist, giving up on good outcomes, or dismissing ambition. That is not what it means. Optimism and honest assessment can coexist. It is entirely possible to believe in a good outcome while still looking clearly at the current situation. The problem is not hoping for the best. It is when hope replaces analysis, when instead of looking at the numbers, you tell yourself you have a feeling it will work out, when instead of weighing real risks, you focus only on the possible upside. Grounded optimism says, I believe I can make this work, and here is my plan based on what the evidence actually shows. Wishful thinking says, it will be fine because I want it to be. The distance between those two positions is significant. Which side of it you land on often comes down to a single habit. Whether you look at the evidence before you look at your preferences, or the other way around. Result: desire provides energy, but direction comes from evidence. Hope is a useful motivator and a poor guide for decisions. Base your choices on what is actually there, and your hopes are more likely to survive contact with reality. Rule 7. Triangulation. Look at every problem from more than one angle. The rule: someone who makes a decision based only on their own perspective is using only part of the available information, while still bearing the consequences of what they missed. You face a serious choice: a job change, a new project, a difficult conversation. You think it through, weigh what you know, arrive at a conclusion. It feels sound, so you act. A few months later, you discover you missed something that any outside observer would have noticed quickly. Not because you were careless, but because you were looking from a single angle, your own. This is common enough that it barely needs illustration. An entrepreneur launches something that seems clearly right without consulting a single potential customer. A manager makes a staffing decision based only on their own impression of someone, without talking to people who work with that person daily. Someone walks into a conflict certain they are right, because they have only ever seen the situation through their own eyes. In each case, the problem is not the quality of the thinking. It is how narrow the view was. A single point of view is often only one angle on a much larger object. You see part of something and feel certain you are seeing all of it. The more confident you feel in that conclusion, the more that confidence can work against you. Why it works. Imagine needing to assess a building, but being able to see only its front. The facade looks solid and well maintained, so you conclude it is in good shape. The far wall has a crack running its full height. The side entrance is blocked. You could not have known, not because your eyes failed you, but because your position did not allow you to see it. Individual opinion tends to work similarly. It captures part of the situation and unavoidably leaves out the rest. Two additional perspectives, from people with different experience, different roles, different vantage points, do not just supply more information. They add dimension. They surface what was outside your angle of view. The key word is independent. Three people who think as you do not give you three perspectives. They give you one perspective repeated 3 times. The value appears when the second and third views genuinely differ from yours. When they raise an aspect you had not considered. When they ask a question you did not think to ask. The most useful information often emerges where opinions diverge. That is where your picture gets corrected. Many strong decisions improve when tested against other perspectives. Not because any single outside view is necessarily better, but because the combination tends to be more complete than what one person can produce alone. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Before any significant decision, identify 2 people whose views you want to hear. Choose people who think differently from you or who have different experience in the relevant area, not people who tend to agree with you. 2. When you present the situation, give only the facts. Leave out your conclusions and any signal of what answer you are hoping for. Otherwise, you will not get an independent view. you will get a version of your own reflected back. 3. Listen in order to learn, not out of courtesy. Write down the arguments that differ from your position and return to them after the conversation, once the immediate reaction has settled. 4. If 2 of the 3 perspectives align and yours is the one that differs, treat that as a signal to reconsider, while still evaluating the evidence behind each view rather than simply deferring to the majority. 5. Build a small standing group of 3 or 4 people from different areas of life. People you can bring serious questions to and trust to give you an honest, sometimes uncomfortable answer. Common mistake. People often turn triangulation into a search for confirmation of a decision they have already made. They ask for opinions, not to learn something, but to hear that they were right. They choose people who think the same way. They frame the question so that agreement is the natural response. They listen to objections and have already dismissed them before the other person finishes speaking. That is not triangulation. It is a performance in which you are both the director and the only audience. Real triangulation starts with a genuine willingness to find out you are wrong. It requires discipline, actively looking for views that cut against your own. It requires honesty, hearing what is actually being said rather than what you find easy to accept. And it requires being willing to accept that your original conclusion may be the weakest option on the table. That willingness is what tends to separate people who make accurate decisions from those who make comfortable ones. Result: 1 perspective is an opinion. 2 perspectives create debate. 3 begin to produce something more grounded. When time allows, do not commit to a major decision until you have looked at it from more than one angle, and the quality of your choices is likely to improve.
By the way, it would be interesting to know your opinion. Do you agree with the author's point of view? If you agree with this idea, write the word agree in the comments.
Rule 8. Listen to the credible. Ignore the rest. Not all opinions are equal. The rule. The value of advice depends partly on whether the person giving it has relevant knowledge, experience, and judgment in the area they are speaking about, not on how confidently they speak. Opinions cost nothing and are everywhere. Mention your plans to almost anyone, and advice will follow. A colleague who has never started a business will explain why your plan will not work. An acquaintance whose own relationship is falling apart will tell you how to fix yours. A relative who has spent their entire career in one role will lay out in detail why changing direction would be a mistake. What makes this difficult is that these people often speak with real confidence, sometimes more confidence than people who actually know what they are talking about. A certain tone is easy to mistake for genuine knowledge, and acting on that mistake can be costly. You have probably experienced this. You followed advice from someone who sounded authoritative, and later found there was nothing behind their words except their general sense of how things work. No relevant experience, no track record, no tested judgment. Just an opinion, delivered well, but empty. And you may also remember ignoring someone who spoke quietly, but actually knew the territory, because they were not forceful enough to cut through. The confidence of an opinion and its usefulness often have little to do with each other. Why it works. Imagine you are unwell and need to understand what is wrong. You could ask 10 people at random and each would offer a theory, a cold, an allergy, something they read about once. They would be sincere and some insistent. But you would go to a doctor, not because the doctor is easier to talk to, but because their words are backed by training, clinical experience, and relevant expertise. They have earned credibility in that specific area. The same logic applies elsewhere. Someone who has built a business and watched it fail, or built one and kept it running, may understand something about that process that a person who has only observed it from outside does not. Someone who has worked through a serious breakdown in a relationship may understand something about partnership that a well-meaning bystander cannot. Relevant experience is a filter that separates genuine knowledge from the appearance of it, though it is worth remembering that success is not always proof of understanding. Some people succeed for reasons they cannot fully explain, and their advice may reflect that. When you start evaluating advice not by how assured it sounds, but by whether the person has relevant knowledge and judgment, the quality of advice you accept improves considerably. You stop being pulled in different directions by every passing opinion and begin drawing more deliberately on people who have actually worked through what you are facing. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Before acting on anyone's advice, ask yourself, does this person have relevant experience and judgment in the specific area they are speaking about? If not, listen politely, but do not let their words carry much weight in your decision. 2. Build a short list of people, 1 or 2 for each area that matters to you, whose knowledge and judgment you genuinely respect. Go to them when you face a serious decision, rather than whoever happens to be nearby. 3. Learn to distinguish between confidence and competence. Pay attention not to tone or forcefulness, but to specificity. Someone who actually knows a subject tends to speak in concrete details and examples. Someone who does not tends to speak in generalities and certainties. 4. When you receive unsolicited advice, do not argue or explain why it does not apply. Thank the person and quietly evaluate it by the same standard. Does real experience stand behind these words? 5. Revisit your list of trusted sources periodically. People change. Knowledge becomes outdated. Circumstances shift. Someone whose judgment you relied on 5 years ago may not be the right reference point today. Common mistake. Some people take this principle and turn it into a kind of blanket dismissiveness, ignoring anyone outside a narrow set of approved voices. But filtering advice is not the same as being closed off. A closed person refuses to listen. A selective person remains open, but assigns weight carefully, based on whether the person has relevant knowledge rather than a confident manner. There is also a subtler version of this mistake, treating someone credible in one area as credible across all of them. A skilled investor may have little useful insight into relationships. A talented athlete may know nothing about running a business. Credibility is domain-specific, not transferable by reputation alone. The most problematic form of this error is attaching yourself to a single trusted figure and deferring to them on every question. No one person is competent across all areas of life. For each significant area, the source needs to be specific, someone whose experience and judgment are actually relevant to that domain. Result: when you are deciding something important, not every opinion deserves equal weight. Learn to identify whose words come from relevant experience and sound judgment, and whose come mainly from conviction, and you are likely to make fewer avoidable mistakes. Rule 9. Be radically open to new ideas. Be willing to be wrong. The rule: the faster people find their own mistakes, the faster they improve. Watch what happens in almost any disagreement, at work, at home, among friends. One person states a position, another disagrees. From that moment, many people stop listening and start defending. They choose arguments that help them win, not arguments that help them understand. Voices rise, positions harden. If someone says something that challenges your reasoning, the first instinct is rarely, maybe they have a point. It is, how do I push back? You probably know this feeling. Someone points to a weakness in your thinking, and you tense up almost immediately. Not because the argument is poor, but because it threatens your sense of being right. And instead of pausing to consider it, you move straight to a response. This is how many people react. Not out of bad faith, but because being wrong feels like losing. It feels like weakness. And that feeling is one of the main things that slows people down. Every time you defend a position rather than examine it, you give up a chance to get closer to a better answer. You stay where you are, but where you are may be wrong. And you may never find out because you have blocked the feedback that could have corrected you. Why it works. Consider two people navigating an unfamiliar city. The first follows a map they drew themselves and ignores street signs, certain their route is right. Every time a sign points differently, they assume the sign is wrong. The second also uses their own map, but when something does not match, they stop and check. Is the map off? Should I adjust? They do not take every sign at face value, but they take discrepancies seriously enough to investigate. An hour later, the first person is lost. The second has arrived. The difference is not intelligence or luck. It is the willingness to accept that their own map might be inaccurate, and to treat external information as worth examining rather than dismissing. Radical openness works on the same basis. You do not abandon your view. You do not agree with everyone around you. You do something more deliberate. You actively look for where your thinking might be wrong. You invite disagreement. You treat criticism not as an attack, but as something worth examining. And when you find a mistake, you have not lost. Your next decision will be better than your last. One of the best ways to find mistakes is to accept that they may exist and look for them before outcomes force them on you. Progress tends to come not from accumulating confirmation, but from removing error. And the faster you do that, the sooner you arrive at better answers. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When you feel resistance to someone else's argument, pause and ask yourself, am I defending this position because it holds up, or because being wrong feels uncomfortable? 2. Before an important discussion, remind yourself that you are genuinely willing to change your view if the evidence supports it, and say so out loud to set a different tone from the start. 3. When someone disagrees with you, try saying, explain that further. I want to understand your reasoning before offering a response. Then, actually, listen, rather than preparing your counter-argument while they are still speaking. 4. After any significant decision, seek out at least one person who disagrees with it and hear their reasoning in full before you consider the matter settled. 5. Keep a brief record of situations where you turned out to be wrong and acknowledged it. Over time, you will likely notice that many such moments helped you make better decisions afterward, and being wrong will start to feel less threatening. Common mistake. Many people confuse openness with indecision. They start to doubt everything, shift between positions, and find themselves unable to commit because each new argument feels compelling. But radical openness is not the absence of a view. It is the ability to hold a clear position while remaining genuinely willing to revise it when new evidence appears. You do not change your view at every objection. You test it. If the objection is stronger than your reasoning, you update your position. If your reasoning holds up, you can act with more confidence than before, because it has now been examined rather than just assumed. Openness without any settled view tends to produce paralysis. A fixed position without openness tends to produce stubbornness. The balance between them is what tends to separate people who keep developing from those who remain stuck at the same level for a long time. Result: being willing to discover you are wrong is not a weakness. Those who actively look for their mistakes tend to reach better answers sooner than those who spend their energy defending the wrong ones. Rule 10. The 5-step process: goals to problems to diagnosis to plan to action. The rule: when you skip a step between setting a goal and acting on it, the effort you put into the other steps tends to go to waste. Look at how many people try to change something in their lives. They set a goal, to earn more, say, or to get healthier, and immediately start doing things. They stay busy. 6 months later, they are tired and roughly where they started. Or a different version, someone notices a recurring problem, conflict with a partner, perhaps, and starts trying to fix it. They speak more gently, give ground more often, avoid difficult topics. But the conflicts keep returning because they are addressing the surface rather than the cause. They never stop to ask what is actually driving this, what is producing it. There is a third version. People who analyze carefully, understand their problems clearly, can describe the causes, but have an accurate diagnosis and no concrete plan for acting on it. Understanding stays understanding. Nothing changes. None of these people are lazy or unthinking. All of them are working, but they are each skipping steps, and that is why the effort does not produce results. Activity without structure is movement without destination. Why it works. Consider a doctor whose patient comes in with abdominal pain. One approach is to treat the pain immediately, prescribe something, send the patient home. The pain eases for a while. The cause remains. A week later, the patient is back. The better approach is to examine the patient, reach a diagnosis, develop a treatment plan, and then prescribe the appropriate treatment. It takes longer, but each step builds on the one before. The 5-step process follows the same logic. For complex goals, each step usually matters. The goal sets the direction. Without it, your effort lacks a clear direction. Identifying problems shows what is standing in the way. Otherwise, you trip over obstacles you never examined. Diagnosis reveals the root cause. Without it, you treat symptoms and wonder why they keep returning. The plan turns understanding into a specific sequence of actions. Without it, you may know what needs to happen, but not how or in what order. Action brings the plan into reality. Without it, everything before it remains a mental exercise. The strength of this process is not in any single step, but in the sequence as a whole. Skip the goal, and you may be working on the wrong problem. Skip the diagnosis, and the plan will target the wrong cause. Skip the plan, and the actions will be scattered. The chain tends to work when it is complete, and that is why it produces results where unconnected effort often does not. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Start by writing your goal down as specifically as you can. Not, I want to earn more, but I want to reach a particular income by a particular date. A vague goal does not guide the steps that follow. 2. Make a complete list of the obstacles currently standing between you and that goal, without softening or minimizing, including both the ones within your control and those that appear to come from outside. 3. For each obstacle, ask why, at least 3 times in succession. This helps you reach the underlying cause rather than stopping at the visible symptom. 4. Based on your diagnosis, write a step-by-step plan with specific actions and timelines. Each item should be concrete enough that you know exactly what needs to happen next. 5. Work through the plan in sequence, noting the result of each step. If the result differs from what you expected, go back to the diagnosis rather than simply changing the actions. The root cause may have been identified incorrectly. Common mistake. The most common trap is jumping from goal directly to action, skipping diagnosis, and planning entirely. This happens because action creates the feeling of progress. You are doing something, so something must be happening. But doing the wrong thing faster does not help. It just gets you further from the goal more quickly. This tends to affect people who are energetic and action-oriented most. Stopping to think feels like losing time. Analysis feels like delay. But acting without a diagnosis means working without knowing what you are actually trying to fix. You expend effort and stay busy, while the real problem goes unaddressed. The pause between understanding a problem and beginning to act is not wasted time. It is where accuracy develops. And accuracy often matters more than speed when it comes to actually reaching a result. Results tend to be a product of the right sequence, not just the amount of effort. Work through all 5 steps without skipping any, and your efforts are more likely to move you toward your goal rather than around it. Part 3. Learning and growth. Rule 11. Mistakes are fine if you learn from them. The rule. A repeated mistake is no longer just a mistake. It is a sign that something has gone unexamined. Someone runs an advertising campaign. It fails. They are discouraged, close it down, and launch another. That one fails too, for the same reason. They close it down and launch another. A year later, they have 10 failures behind them and have drawn no conclusions from any of them. Another example. Someone repeatedly misses deadlines. Each time, they tell themselves it will be different next time. Each time they mean it. And each time the same sequence plays out. Too many tasks taken on. The most important one left until last. Time running out. The promise fades until the next deadline approaches. A third version, perhaps more familiar. Someone keeps having the same kind of argument with people close to them. A flash of anger, sharp words, then silence, and guilt. They feel bad. Promise it will not happen again. 2 weeks later, the same scene. You probably recognize this, if not in those details, then in the shape of it. The same thing recurring, each time feeling almost unexpected. The problem is not the mistakes themselves. Mistakes are unavoidable in any kind of work, in any relationship, at any age. The problem is that most people treat them as unpleasant events to put behind them quickly, rather than as information worth recording and using. Why it works. Think of a researcher running experiments. Each one produces either an expected result or an unexpected one. If expected, it may support the hypothesis. If unexpected, it challenges it. Both outcomes can be useful if recorded and analyzed properly. A failed experiment is not a setback, it is data. The researcher notes what did not work, considers why, and adjusts. A mistake in ordinary life works on the same basis. It shows you where your understanding of a situation diverged from the situation itself. But only if you stop and record what happened, what you did, and what led to the result you did not want. Without that, the mistake remains just an unpleasant event. With it, it becomes a reference point, the place where you stop repeating the same pattern and begin adjusting. If the same situation arises 3 times, it is worth treating it as a possible pattern rather than bad luck. Behind it is usually something specific, a habit, an assumption, a way of responding that has not been examined. Identifying that pattern gives you access to the underlying cause. And when the underlying cause is addressed, a whole series of recurring difficulties often goes with it. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Keep a dedicated document or notebook where you log each significant mistake. What happened, what decision led to it, and what you can see now that you could not see at the time. 2. Once a month, read through the whole record and look for recurring themes. If the same type of situation or decision appears 3 or more times, treat it as a possible pattern worth examining separately. 3. For each recorded mistake, write a specific rule for the future. Not, be more careful, but something like, before signing any contract, have it reviewed by someone outside the deal, regardless of how much I trust the other party. 4. Separate the emotion from the analysis. Give yourself time to feel the frustration first, then, separately, when calmer, examine what happened. Objective analysis is much harder during a strong emotional reaction. 5. Talk through your mistakes with people you trust. Saying a situation out loud often surfaces details that written analysis misses, and another perspective can show you things that are difficult to see from inside. Common mistake. Many people turn the process of examining mistakes into self-punishment. Instead of calm analysis, they get stuck in a loop. How could I have done that? Why am I like this? This always happens to me. This is not working with a mistake. It is suffering over it. And it is not only unhelpful, it tends to create a fear of making mistakes at all. Someone afraid to make mistakes stops trying things. They stick to safe, familiar paths and avoid new experiences. They stop developing, not because they are incapable, but because they have connected mistakes with shame rather than with learning. A more useful relationship with mistakes resembles how a careful engineer approaches a mechanical failure, without excessive emotion, with an accurate description of what went wrong and with a plan to address it. The task is not to pretend mistakes can always be avoided, but to reduce them where possible and learn quickly when they happen. If every mistake becomes an occasion for distress, you lose twice, once on the mistake itself, and again on the energy spent in suffering rather than drawing conclusions. Result: a mistake that gets recorded tends to become a lesson. One left unexamined tends to become a habit. The difference between people who keep improving and those who stay stuck is not the number of mistakes they make. It is what they do with them afterward. Rule 12. Your greatest asset is the ability to learn, not what you already know. The rule: in a world that changes faster than old knowledge can remain useful, the advantage often goes to those who combine solid knowledge with the ability to keep learning. Some people have accumulated a great deal of knowledge. They have read widely, completed many courses, built up an impressive store of information. They can hold their own in any conversation, give detailed answers, cite relevant sources. But when conditions shift, and they always do, these people often find themselves at a loss. Their knowledge was shaped for a different set of circumstances. The tools, markets, and methods that existed a year or 5 years ago. The landscape has changed, and the old map no longer matches the territory. You have probably seen this. Someone who was genuinely excellent at what they did, but could not adjust when the context changed. An accountant who knew the old reporting system inside out and struggled when a new one arrived. A manager whose approach worked well for a decade, but failed to resonate with a newer generation of employees. An entrepreneur who built something successful on one model and found themselves unable to adapt when the market moved on. In each case, the problem was not lack of intelligence or effort. The problem was that they had invested everything in specific knowledge and nothing in the capacity to keep learning. The world kept changing. Their toolkit did not. Why it works? Consider 2 tools. The first is a sharp knife, useful right now, but it dulls over time. If you cannot sharpen it, it eventually stops working. The second is a whetstone. On its own it cuts nothing, but with it, you can restore any blade, familiar or new. Knowledge is the knife. The ability to learn is the whetstone. The metaphor has limits. A whetstone without any knife solves nothing, and learning ability still requires prior knowledge to build on. But the direction it points is useful. Specific knowledge handles the problem in front of you today. The ability to learn helps you acquire the knowledge the next problem requires, whatever that turns out to be. This capacity also tends to grow with use. The more you practice learning, the more readily the next round comes. You begin to recognize patterns across different areas, get faster at identifying what matters, and already have a sense of how learning something new usually works. Each cycle builds on the one before. After a few years, the gap between someone who has been developing this capacity and someone who has only been adding to a fixed store of knowledge can become significant. The first adapts to new circumstances relatively quickly. The second finds each new shift harder to absorb because they have less practice navigating the unfamiliar. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Regularly put yourself in the position of a beginner. Every 6 months or so, start learning something genuinely unfamiliar. A new language, a different skill, an area you know nothing about. This keeps the process of learning itself familiar and reduces the resistance that tends to come with starting something new. 2. After each significant learning experience, record not only what you learned, but how you learned it, which approaches helped, what slowed you down, at what point things began to make sense. Over time, this builds a clearer picture of how you learn most effectively. 3. When your familiar approaches stop producing results, Treat that as a signal to update, rather than as something unfair. And begin learning again before a crisis forces you to. 4. Seek out people who have already mastered what you need, and pay attention to how they think, not just what they conclude. Understanding how someone arrived at their knowledge is often more valuable than the knowledge itself. 5. Set aside dedicated time for learning, not when there is a chance, but specific hours each week protected from other demands. Without regular practice, learning can become slower and more uncomfortable over time. Common mistake. Many people confuse consuming information with learning. They read articles, watch videos, listen to podcasts, and feel that they are developing. But learning does not happen primarily in the moment of consumption. It happens in the moment of application. Reading about negotiation is not the same as learning to negotiate. Watching a video about financial planning is not the same as learning to manage money. Information that never passes through practice tends to stay theoretical. It creates a sense of progress without necessarily producing a change in what you can actually do. Someone who has read widely about business but never launched anything may know less in a practical sense than someone who read less but applied what they found. The capacity to learn is not about how quickly you take in information. It is about how quickly you turn information into action and action into results. If you consume a great deal but apply very little, the learning is probably not sticking. Result: specific knowledge can lose value over time as circumstances change. The ability to keep learning is what allows you to replace it. Invest in not only what you know, but in how readily you can learn what you do not yet know. And change becomes something you can work with rather than something that catches you off guard. Rule 13. Struggle well. Difficulties are normal. What matters is how you respond. The rule: the quality of someone's life is shaped less by how many problems it contains than by how those problems are met. There is a persistent illusion that most people carry at some point. Once I solve this problem, things will get easier. Pay off the debt and breathe easier. Find a better job and everything will settle. Reach a certain income and the difficulties will stop. The problem gets solved and another takes its place almost immediately. Not because of bad luck, but because that is how an active life tends to work. Problems rarely disappear permanently. They tend to change form. A student has their difficulties. An entrepreneur has theirs. Someone in retirement has theirs. Different circumstances often bring different problems, not necessarily fewer of them. You have probably noticed this yourself. There was a moment when you thought things were about to get easier. Did they? More likely, they became different. Each new stage of life tends to bring its own set of challenges. People who wait for difficulties to eventually stop spend a great deal of energy waiting for something that may not arrive. They experience each new problem as an injustice, as evidence that something has gone wrong. But problems are not a malfunction. They are a normal part of moving forward. The question is usually not whether difficulties will come. It is how you will handle them when they do. Why it works. Consider two climbers on the same mountain. Both encounter the same conditions: steep sections, loose rock, wind, fatigue. The first treats each obstacle as evidence that they chose the wrong route. They stop, doubt themselves, and spend energy on frustration. The second treats the same difficulties as an expected part of the climb. Unwelcome but not surprising. They do not waste effort on being shocked. They assess the obstacle, choose a way through, and take the next step. By the end of the day, the first is halfway up, worn down less by the physical demands than by the emotional ones. The second has reached the top. The difference lies not only in conditions, but in how each person relates to them. When you accept in advance that problems will come, they lose some of their power to derail you. They stop feeling like a shock. You stop spending energy on the fact that a problem exists and direct it instead toward the problem itself. This is not emotional suppression or indifference. It is a clearer understanding of how things tend to work. Once you stop fighting the fact that difficulties are part of any forward-moving life, you free up energy that was previously going into protest, and that energy becomes available for something more useful. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When you encounter a new problem, start by telling yourself, this is normal. This is part of the process. Not to dismiss what you are feeling, but to reduce the emotional charge enough to shift into problem-solving mode. 2. Practice separating two stages. First, acknowledge that the problem exists and that it is genuinely difficult. Then, separately and deliberately, move to the question of what you can actually do right now. 3. Stop comparing your difficulties to other people's apparent ease. You see their outcomes, not their problems. And most people are dealing with things that are not visible from the outside. 4. After getting through a significant obstacle, write a brief note. What was hard? How you handled it? What helped? Over time, this builds a personal record of what tends to work for you, which becomes useful the next time something similar comes up. 5. When a problem feels overwhelming, reduce the scope of the question. Instead of, how do I solve all of this? Ask, what is one step I can take in the next hour? And take that step. Though if the exhaustion runs deeper, a single step may not be enough, and support or rest may be needed before action is possible. Common mistake. Many people confuse accepting difficulty with passive endurance. They hear, struggle is normal, and conclude they simply need to grit their teeth and wait it out. But endurance without action is not struggling well. It is suffering without direction. Accepting that difficulties are normal does not mean resigning yourself to them. It means stopping being surprised by their arrival and starting to respond to them constructively. There is a real difference between someone who says, well, life is hard and gives up, and someone who says, yes, this is hard. And here is what I'm going to do about it. The first has accepted difficulty as something fixed and beyond influence. The second has accepted it as part of the situation that must be dealt with, and that framing tends to direct thinking toward action rather than away from it. If accepting difficulties has become chronic exhaustion and a growing sense of helplessness, that is a different problem. One concrete step can help break the inertia, but deeper exhaustion may require support or a more significant change before action becomes possible again. Result: difficulties are not a deviation from a normal life. They tend to accompany any life that is moving. Someone who handles them calmly and with attention on what can be done tends to get through the same obstacles with less damage than someone who spends significant energy resenting the fact that obstacles exist at all. Rule 14. Evolve or fall behind. Adaptation is essential when conditions change. The rule: what worked before can stop working when the context changes, and staying current requires changing along with it. There is a particular kind of failure that is slow and barely visible as it happens. Someone finds an approach that gets results, a working method, a communication style, a business model, a way of managing people. It works, so they keep doing it. The world around them shifts, markets move, technologies develop, expectations shift, but they hold on to what once brought success. For a while, the gap is easy to miss. Results are slightly worse, but external factors take the blame. Then the decline becomes harder to ignore, but by then they are too attached to the familiar. They tell themselves to wait it out. The market will come back. People will come around. Things will return to how they were. Then comes the moment when they find themselves far behind and cannot understand how it happened. They were not lazy. They kept doing everything they had always done. That is precisely the problem. Doing what you have always done is a reasonable strategy when the context stays the same. When it does not, the same approach tends to produce gradually worse results. You have probably seen this in careers, where someone spent 20 years doing the same work the same way and eventually found their skills no longer in demand. In relationships, where one person grew and changed while the other did not, and the distance between them became too wide to bridge. In companies that led their markets and then disappeared within a few years because they could not adjust. Remaining in place while everything around you moves is not the same as holding a position. It is drifting backward without noticing. Why it works. Nature is not stable in the way people often imagine. A river that appears unchanged is carrying different water every second. A forest that looks the same year after year is continuously renewing itself. Some trees growing, others giving way. Species that fail to adapt to changes in their environment tend to decline over time, losing the traits that once made survival possible. Human life follows a similar pattern. The environment around you is in constant motion. Technologies change. What people expect from work, from relationships, from institutions changes. The rules that governed a given field a decade ago may not apply in the same way today. The task is not to remain fixed in one position, but to keep adjusting as conditions develop. Adaptation is not a single event. It is a continuous process with no finishing point. You do not adapt once and carry on unchanged. You adjust, and then adjust again, month by month, year by year. People who build this into their lives as a habit are less likely to experience every change as a crisis. They do not spend energy resisting what is shifting around them. They adjust course steadily and without excessive drama. That quiet, ongoing adjustment tends to produce a kind of resilience that looks like stability from the outside, but is built, in fact, on continuous movement. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Every 6 months, review your main approaches to work, to relationships, to how you manage time and money, and ask honestly, is this still working or am I continuing out of habit? 2. Pay attention to what is changing around you, not with anxiety, but with curiosity. What new tools or methods have appeared? Which old assumptions no longer seem to hold? How has the behavior of people around you shifted? 3. When a familiar method starts producing slightly worse results, resist the urge to blame external circumstances. Treat it as an early signal and start looking for alternatives before the old approach stops working entirely. 4. Talk regularly with people from different fields and different generations. They see the world differently, and their perspective tends to surface shifts that are easy to miss from inside your own familiar circle. 5. When something in your environment changes, try treating it as a new set of conditions that calls for a new response, rather than as a problem to wait out. This tends to shift thinking from resistance toward adjustment. Common mistake. Many people experience adaptation as a kind of self-betrayal. Changing their approach or methods feels like abandoning what made them successful, or admitting that what they did before was wrong. They hold on to old ways out of loyalty, pride, or a belief that changing course means conceding something. But adapting is not a rejection of the past. It is a response to the present. You are not giving up what you were. You are becoming what the new circumstances require. The most capable version of yourself is not a fixed record of past successes. It is someone who takes what was genuinely valuable from experience and adds to it what the present demands. Those who confuse loyalty to themselves with inflexibility sometimes find, eventually, that the world has moved on while they remained in place, with their principles intact but no longer relevant to the situation around them. Not because the principles were wrong, but because the way they were being applied had stopped fitting the reality they were meant to address. Result: the world does not wait for you to feel ready. It changes regardless. Those who build adaptation into their habits tend to move with changing conditions rather than against them. Those who hold on to methods that have stopped fitting their context tend to find those methods producing less and less over time. Rule 15. Learn from nature. It offers patterns worth paying attention to. The rule: the patterns observable in nature can sometimes illuminate business, relationships, and everyday life, though the scale and context always differ. Most people tend to think of their lives as separate from the natural world. Career is one thing, relationships another. Nature is something outside the window, unrelated to the matter at hand. They look for answers in books, courses, and advice, and in doing so, they sometimes walk past patterns that have been tested through countless cycles of trial, failure, and adaptation over an enormous span of time. A tree grows toward available light rather than in a fixed direction. A river moves around obstacles rather than stopping at them. These are not just appealing images. They describe real processes that have been shaped by relentless pressure over time. What persists in nature has generally survived because it works under difficult conditions. That does not make every natural process wise or transferable. Nature also contains enormous waste, cruelty, extinction, and dead ends. But some of the patterns that emerge from it are worth examining because they describe structural tendencies that appear across many different kinds of systems. Most people walk past this entirely. They try to reason their way through problems without noticing that some of the clearest available models are already there in the world around them. Why it works? Think of the ecosystem as a rough model. In a functioning forest, many elements are connected. What one organism produces, another uses. Decay feeds new growth. The system is not waste-free, far from it, but it tends toward a kind of circulation rather than simple depletion. Applied loosely to a business or a team, this raises useful questions. Are there processes that produce nothing? Resources flowing in directions that lead nowhere? Connections that exist on paper but deliver nothing in practice? Or consider the pattern of adaptation. In nature, what tends to survive is not necessarily the strongest or the most elaborate, but whatever adjusts most readily when conditions change. Species that cannot adjust to new environments decline. The same tendency appears in careers, organizations, and relationships, though in human contexts, ethics, culture, and conscious choice complicate the picture considerably. The pattern is suggestive, not prescriptive. Or feedback. Natural systems respond continuously to what is happening around them. An organism that cannot read and respond to its environment does not last long. In everyday life, the same tendency applies. Ignoring consistent signals, from customers, from a partner, from your own health, tends to produce consequences that accumulate over time. These patterns are analogies, not laws. They do not transfer directly from biology to human life. But as prompts for reflection, they can surface questions that are easy to miss otherwise. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When you face a difficult situation, ask yourself, is there a pattern in how natural systems handle something similar? Not to copy it directly, but to see whether it suggests a useful angle. 2. Periodically check your situation against 3 rough patterns. Adaptation. Am I adjusting as my circumstances change? Feedback. Am I paying attention to how things are responding to what I do? Circulation. Are the resources and effort I am putting in actually producing something or disappearing into processes that go nowhere? 3. Observe natural systems around you with some attention rather than as background. How plants respond to available light. How ecosystems recover after disruption. Each of these contains a tendency that may be worth thinking about in relation to your own situation. 4. When your usual approach stops working, consider changing the form rather than increasing the pressure. The way water does not break through rock by force, but finds a route around it. 5. Test your plans for fragility. If a plan requires everything to go smoothly and nothing to break down, it may not hold under real conditions, because real conditions rarely cooperate fully, and more robust plans tend to account for this. Common mistake. Many people treat the idea of learning from nature as decorative, appealing in principle, but not relevant to actual decisions. They agree that nature is instructive and then return to their usual tools without ever genuinely applying any natural pattern to their own situation. This happens because there is a gap between observation and application. Noticing that a river moves around a rock is easy. Recognizing that you yourself are currently forcing your way through an obstacle, rather than looking for a different route, is harder. The patterns only become useful when translated from the general into the specific. Not adapt as a slogan, but my current approach is not producing results and I am going to try something different. Not be like water as an aspiration, but in this situation I should stop pushing and look for another way through. The distance between an interesting observation and a useful one lies in whether it gets turned into daily practice. Result: nature has been shaped by an enormous span of time and relentless pressure, and some of what has persisted through that process contains patterns worth examining. Use them as prompts. Observe, translate what seems relevant into specific actions, and test it against your own situation. Not as a rulebook, but as a source of angles you might not have considered otherwise. Part 4. Work and Relationships. Rule 16. Meaningful work and meaningful relationships. The real goals of a life. The rule: beyond a certain point, income cannot fully compensate for the absence of meaning in your work or in the people you spend your time with. Someone gets a promotion, the salary is higher, the title sounds impressive, colleagues offer congratulations. 3 months later, they feel much the same as before. They thought the problem was money. It was not. Another version: an entrepreneur reaches the income they spent 5 years working toward. They can afford more, travel more, worry less about the basics. Within 6 months, the satisfaction is gone. Not because the money is insufficient, but because every morning they go to work that does not engage them, and every evening they return to people they are connected to only by habit. A third scenario: someone so absorbed in their career that they gradually lose everyone close to them, not through conflict, simply through neglect. They did not call, did not ask, did not make time. At some point they find there is no one to call on a Friday evening. Everything looks fine on paper, but there is no one around. You probably recognize at least one of these situations, perhaps not in such extreme form, but in that feeling when things look fine from the outside and something inside does not add up. That feeling is a signal. It points to a life built around the wrong priorities. Why it works. Think of a long drive. You have been on the road for hours. If the landscape is flat and grey and you have no clear sense of why you are going, the fatigue sets in early, not from the driving itself, but from the lack of purpose. If you know where you are headed, if the route holds some interest, if there is someone beside you whose company you enjoy, the same distance feels entirely different. You notice the time less. You arrive feeling the journey was worth something. Work follows a similar pattern. When it is meaningful, when you understand why you are doing it, can see its results, feel that it matters, the effort may feel more worthwhile, even when it is tiring. Money does not disappear from this picture, but it tends to become a consequence of what you are doing, rather than the only reason for doing it. The same applies to relationships. Someone surrounded by people they genuinely value, and who genuinely value them, has something that cannot be purchased. Support when things are hard, real pleasure when things are good, honest feedback, shared history. Without it, even significant external success tends to feel thin. People who have reached considerable financial heights but lost meaningful connections often describe the experience with one word: loneliness. Not the physical kind, but something deeper, having most things and missing the ones that actually count. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Ask yourself 2 direct questions. Does this work matter to me beyond the paycheck? And are there people in my life I would invest real time and energy in, with no expectation of anything in return? Honest answers will show you where you actually stand. 2. If your work feels empty, try to identify specifically what is missing. Perhaps you cannot see the results of what you do. Perhaps you do not believe in the product. Perhaps you feel no growth. A clearer diagnosis tends to point toward a more useful response. 3. Invest in relationships as deliberately as you invest in your career. Set aside time, show genuine interest, be present not only when it is convenient. Relationships, like anything valuable, require regular attention to hold up over time. 4. Check your actual priorities against how you spend your time. Look at a typical week. If work occupies 90% of it and the people who matter to you receive almost none, that gap is worth examining honestly. 5. Do not defer meaning to some later point. Do not tell yourself you will pursue what matters once you have earned enough, or spend more time with people you care about once things slow down. That later point tends to arrive more slowly than expected, and sometimes not at all. Common mistake. Many people try to resolve a sense of emptiness by earning more. They take on additional work, push harder, look for a higher paying position. For a while this helps. A new goal, a new challenge, the momentum of pursuit. But once that momentum subsides, the feeling returns, because the root of the problem is not the income. It is the absence of meaning in daily activity and the absence of depth in relationships. Money is a necessary resource. Without enough of it, life is genuinely harder, and the other questions become difficult to focus on. But beyond a certain level, it functions more like a foundation than a destination. A solid foundation matters, but it is not somewhere you actually live. Someone who builds only the foundation tends to find eventually that there is nothing above it. Someone who also works on what they build there, meaningful work and relationships that matter, tends to feel more at home in their own life. Result: a lasting sense of a full life tends to come from two things: work that means something to you and people who genuinely matter to you. Everything else is useful, but not a substitute for either. Build around those two things, and money can become a support for the life you are building, rather than its only measure. Rule 17. Tough love beats polite silence. Tell the truth with care. The rule: when you stay quiet to spare someone discomfort, you may be causing more harm than an honest word said at the right time. Many people eventually see someone close to them making what appears to be a serious mistake, putting money into a questionable venture, staying in a relationship that is visibly damaging them, making a professional decision whose risks are obvious to everyone but them, and they say nothing, not because they do not care, but because they do not want to upset anyone, spoil the atmosphere, or cause a conflict. It is their life. They are an adult. It is not your place. Then the person makes the mistake. They lose money, time, or a relationship. And when it is done, they ask, "Why did nobody say anything?" And the uncomfortable answer is that people did see it. They knew, and they stayed quiet, out of politeness, out of a wish not to be the one who says difficult things. This happens regularly in families, in workplaces, in friendships. People stay quiet when they could speak. They nod when they might reasonably push back. They call this consideration, when often it is a way of protecting their own comfort rather than the person who needed an honest word. Why it works. Consider two doctors. The first notices a serious symptom but does not want to alarm the patient, so he says, "Things look broadly fine, just take care of yourself." The patient leaves feeling better and loses the window in which the condition could still have been addressed easily. The second sees the same symptom and says, "I can see a problem, and here is what we should do." The patient is unsettled, but they have the information and time to act. The doctor analogy has its limits. A doctor has professional training, a clear role, and the patient's consent. Personal relationships are more complicated, and the same level of directness is not always welcome or appropriate. But the underlying point holds. Withholding accurate information to protect someone's feelings in the moment can cost them considerably more later. When you tell someone the truth, directly, without softening it until it no longer helps, but with genuine respect, you do something that requires a degree of courage and that only people who actually care tend to do. A real friend may be willing to say, "I can see a problem, and I feel I should say something because what happens to you matters to me." Not every situation calls for this, but when it does, staying quiet is not neutral. It has a cost. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When you can see that someone close to you is making what looks like a serious mistake, ask yourself, would I want someone to tell me if I were in their position? And am I close enough to this person to say it responsibly? If both answers point toward yes, find a way to say it rather than postponing indefinitely. 2. Frame your feedback around specific observations and genuine concern for the outcome. Not, "You are making a mistake," but "I can see a specific problem, and I'm saying this because I want things to go well for you." 3. Choose a considered moment. This kind of conversation is not something to have in the middle of an argument or in front of other people. It works best one-on-one when both people are calm enough to actually hear each other. 4. Do not expect immediate gratitude. Give the person time to absorb what you said and be prepared for the first reaction to be defensive or uncomfortable. 5. Establish a mutual understanding with the people closest to you. We tell each other the truth, even when it is not easy. That kind of agreement tends to make honesty feel less like an exception and more like a normal part of how you relate to each other. 6. Recognize that speaking honestly with care is a skill. Start with lower stakes situations. Pay attention to how your words are received, and you will be better prepared when a harder conversation becomes necessary. Common mistake. Many people use the idea of tough love as a justification for bluntness. They say whatever they think, in whatever form, at whatever moment, often sharply and without much thought for how it lands, and then add, "I'm just being honest." But there is a real distance between honesty and unnecessary harshness. Tough love is not the right to say anything difficult in any form you choose. It is the willingness to say what needs to be said to the person who needs to hear it in a form they are actually able to receive. If what you say wounds but does not help, you have probably released frustration rather than shown care. The two can look similar in the moment and feel very different on the receiving end. Someone who genuinely cares thinks about both the content and the delivery. They consider their words, take into account how the other person is doing, and speak with respect, even when the message is hard. That combination is what makes this kind of honesty useful, rather than simply uncomfortable. Result: real care is not about protecting someone from difficult words. It is about protecting them from the consequences that follow when those words are never said. Speak the truth when it matters. Choose your moment carefully and speak with respect. And the relationships built on that tend to hold up better than those built on comfortable silence. Rule 18. Surround yourself with people who challenge your ideas. The rule. An environment where everyone agrees with you may create comfort, but it also creates blind spots. Notice how people tend to choose their company. They gravitate toward those who think similarly, share their views, and support their decisions. It feels safe and reassuring. You share an idea and people nod. You describe a plan and those around you approve. You make a decision and nobody asks an uncomfortable question until the consequences arrive. Because reality does not nod. It does not agree out of politeness. It tests every decision. And if there was a weakness that nobody noticed because everyone was busy approving, the full cost eventually lands. You have probably seen this. A manager surrounded by people afraid to disagree makes one poor decision after another, none of which survive contact with the actual situation. An entrepreneur whose friends always say, "great idea," launches something that fails for reasons any outside observer would have spotted. Someone whose close circle never offers criticism repeats the same patterns because nobody ever pointed them out. In each case, the problem is not only the decision itself, but the environment that allowed it to go untested. When everyone around you agrees, you are missing the main corrective tool available: honest, constructive resistance to your thinking. Why it works. Think of a blacksmith shaping a blade. The hammer alone is not enough. There needs to be an anvil underneath. Without a solid surface to work against, the blow does not shape the metal. The resistance is what produces form and strength. People who challenge your ideas work similarly. Without them, your thinking stays soft and untested. With them, each idea either emerges stronger or gets set aside, making room for something better. When someone argues with you not to win, but to find what is actually sound, they help you locate the weak points in your reasoning before reality does. And reality tends to be less considerate than even the most direct person in your life. Constructive disagreement functions as a stress test. An idea that has survived serious objections is worth more than one that has never been questioned, because the first has been tested and the second simply has not met any resistance yet. When the untested idea finally encounters real conditions, you have no prepared response, no sense of where the vulnerabilities are, and no fallback. People who disagree with you give you all of that in advance if you are willing to listen. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Look honestly at your closest circle and ask, when did someone last seriously challenge one of your ideas? If you cannot remember, that is worth paying attention to. 2. Deliberately include at least one person in your regular conversations who thinks differently, a different background, a different field, a different temperament, and discuss your important decisions with them. 3. When someone disagrees with you, resist the urge to defend yourself immediately. Try saying, "Tell me more about why you think that," and listen to the full answer without preparing your response while they are still speaking. 4. For decisions where the stakes are high and time allows, ask someone to look specifically for the weaknesses in your plan before you commit to it. A deliberate attempt to find flaws before acting tends to surface problems that approval never would. 5. Value the people in your life who say no or "I disagree." Do not push them to the edges of your circle. Bring them closer, because they tend to make your thinking more robust, even when what they say is uncomfortable in the moment. Common mistake. Many people confuse constructive challenge with simple negativity. They hear the advice to seek out people who disagree, and either end up tolerating people who criticize everything indiscriminately and without purpose, or they push away anyone who expresses disagreement because any objection feels like an attack. Neither works. Someone who criticizes for its own sake is not challenging your ideas. They are consuming your energy. Someone who argues to be seen as right is not helping you think more clearly. They are pursuing something else at your expense. Genuine challenge looks different. A specific objection, supported by reasoning, offered with the aim of finding a better answer rather than scoring a point. Learning to tell the difference allows you to build an environment that both supports you and tests your thinking honestly. These are not in conflict. Support and honest challenge can coexist. And the most durable working relationships and partnerships tend to be built on exactly that. People who genuinely want each other to succeed and who therefore say what they actually think. Result: an environment where everyone agrees with you can feel comfortable while quietly limiting your ability to see what is wrong. An environment where people challenge your ideas tends to produce stronger thinking, because ideas that have been tested honestly are more likely to hold up when they meet the real world. Rule 19. Build a culture of honesty, at home, at work, in life. The rule: when people feel punished for telling the truth, they stop telling it, regardless of how good their intentions are. In most groups, at work, in families, among friends, there is an unspoken agreement: do not say anything that might cause conflict. An employee sees a project heading toward failure and stays quiet because the last person who spoke up was criticized in front of everyone. A partner notices the other making a risky financial decision and does not push back because any conversation about money ends badly. A friend watches someone falling apart and makes a joke because serious conversations are not how things work in that group. None of these people are cowardly or indifferent. They are in an environment where honesty carries a cost, not through formal rules, but through people's reactions, irritation, coldness, being quietly excluded. Someone tells the truth once and the response is negative. The second time they hesitate. The third time they say nothing. The truth stops being spoken, not because people are dishonest by nature, but because the environment makes honesty feel like a risk not worth taking. What matters here is that behavior is often shaped as much by context as by character. Put a genuinely honest person into a culture that penalizes truth-telling, and they may become silent over time, or eventually leave. The environment does not need to be hostile in any dramatic sense. It only needs to make honesty consistently uncomfortable. Why it works. Think of two fish tanks. In the first, the water is clean, the filter works, and conditions are stable. The fish are healthy and active. In the second, the water is cloudy, and the environment is poorly maintained. The fish barely get by. Both tanks may contain the same kind of fish with the same potential. The environment accounts for most of the difference, though it is worth noting that in human groups, people also shape the environment they are in, not just respond to it. The communication culture of a group works similarly. When unspoken concerns accumulate, when mistakes go undiscussed, when people spend energy on not saying the wrong thing rather than on the actual work, decisions get made on incomplete information, problems surface late, and conflicts do not get resolved but pile up. When the environment is different, when honesty is safe, when mistakes can be discussed openly, when criticism is understood as useful rather than threatening, the opposite tends to happen. Information moves more freely. Problems get identified earlier. People do not spend energy on concealment and can direct it toward the work instead. This kind of culture does not appear on its own. It has to be built deliberately and maintained consistently. But when it is genuinely in place, it tends to produce results that formal rules and individual talent alone cannot. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Start with your own reactions. The next time someone tells you something uncomfortable, make a point of acknowledging it respectfully, even if your first instinct is defensive. How you respond to honesty determines whether people will risk being honest with you in the future. 2. Make the norms explicit in your closest circles, whether family, team, or partnership. Say out loud, we speak directly. We take criticism as information rather than attack. We discuss mistakes openly. Named norms reduce the barrier that unspoken culture creates. 3. Separate the person from the idea. When discussing someone's decision, address the decision rather than the person. I see a problem with this plan opens a conversation. You didn't think this through tends to close it. 4. Create regular opportunities for people to speak without fear of punishment or retaliation. A weekly team check-in or a family conversation where each person can raise what is on their mind and where the response is listening rather than defensiveness. 5. Watch what happens after someone speaks up honestly. If they are met with coldness or dismissal, step in and restore the safety, because a single serious violation can damage months of trust, and people are watching how these moments are handled. Common mistake: Many people announce an open culture and stop there. They say, "Here, you can say whatever you think." But they continue reacting with irritation to criticism, dismissing inconvenient views, and showing visible displeasure when someone raises a problem. The words say one thing, the behavior says another, and people pay attention to the behavior. What actually matters to people is what happens when someone risks saying something honest. If the first person to take the invitation seriously suffers for it, everyone else draws the obvious conclusion: the stated culture and the real one are different, and they adjust accordingly. A culture of honesty is not built through announcements. It is built through consistent responses over time. Honest contributions should be received respectfully, even when they need to be challenged or when the timing is poor. A single serious breakdown in that pattern can send a group back towards silence. That is precisely why this kind of culture is harder to build than to declare, and why, when it genuinely exists, it tends to produce something that management systems and written guidelines cannot replicate on their own. Result: environment shapes behavior in ways that are easy to underestimate. Build a culture in which honesty is safe, mistakes can be discussed, and criticism is understood as useful. And the people in it are likely to work better together, make decisions on more complete information, and catch problems earlier than groups where the unspoken rule is to stay quiet. Rule 20. Hire carefully, part ways promptly, choose people by values. The rule: the wrong person on a team tends to cost more than the empty position they fill. You bring someone new onto a team. The resume is strong, the experience looks right, they say the right things in the interview. A month in, the first signals appear. The work is adequate, but they do not get along with colleagues. They commit to things and then do something different. When something goes wrong, they find ways not to be accountable. You notice and decide to wait. Maybe they need more time. Maybe you are reading too much into it. 3 months pass. The situation has not improved. It has gotten worse. Tension builds around them. Stronger members of the team are spending energy compensating for the disruption. The atmosphere deteriorates. But you are still waiting, because letting someone go is unpleasant. Finding a replacement takes time, and they are not without ability. 6 months in, you finally make the decision that should have been made in the first month. When they leave, the team noticeably relaxes, and you realize that the past 5 months were largely wasted. Not just your time, but the time of everyone who worked alongside them. This pattern appears outside of business too. It repeats in partnerships, in friendships, in shared projects of any kind. You bring someone into your life whose fundamental approach does not match yours, and spend months, sometimes years, getting to the point of acknowledging it. Why it works. Many skills can be developed more easily than core values can be changed. Knowledge can be acquired. Experience builds over time. But the values a person operates from tend to shape how they behave under pressure, how they treat others, and what they are actually willing to do when a situation becomes difficult. When those values do not align with the group they are in, the gap tends to show up everywhere. Consider 2 builders working on the same structure. One believes speed is what matters most. The other believes quality is. Both are capable. Both are motivated. But shared values can make decisions easier and trust stronger, and the absence of them makes even straightforward decisions into negotiations. One pushes to move faster, the other pulls back. One cuts corners, the other redoes the work. Energy goes into the friction rather than the building. The same dynamic appears in teams and partnerships. When values broadly align, disagreements tend to be easier to resolve because people are at least working toward the same thing. When they do not, every step requires explanation over things that should not need explaining. This is why assessing values matters in choosing who to work with. Skills affect how well someone does a given task. Values affect whether they are heading in the same direction at all. And addressing a serious mismatch promptly fairly, with proper process, determines how much time and energy will be lost before you act on what you can already see. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Before bringing someone into a team, project, or close circle, identify 3 or 4 things that are non-negotiable for you, and assess whether the person fits those values, not just whether their resume and manner impress you in the moment. 2. Assess values through behavior rather than statements. Ask about specific past situations. How did this person act under pressure, in conflict, when choosing between what was convenient and what was right? Concrete behavior tells you more than any declaration of principles. 3. Set yourself a clear assessment period, 3 months, for example, at the end of which you make a deliberate judgment. Does this person's approach align with yours or not? Without a defined point of decision, the evaluation tends to drift. 4. If serious misalignment becomes clear, address it promptly and fairly, before a crisis forces a rushed decision under pressure. Promptness here does not mean carelessness. It means not letting a recognized problem run for months without action. 5. Do not confuse loyalty with tolerance. Commitment to people who share your values is a strength. Tolerating a serious mismatch indefinitely is a cost paid by everyone around that person, not only you. Common mistake. People tend to delay not because they cannot see the problem, but because they believe they can fix it. One more conversation, one more explanation, one more chance, and the person will change. Sometimes this is right. When the issue is a skill that can be coached, a misunderstanding that can be cleared up, or behavior driven by unclear expectations rather than deeper values. These problems are worth working on. But when the issue is a genuine values mismatch, not just immaturity or poor habits, but a fundamental difference in what the person considers important or acceptable, it almost never resolves through explanation alone. Core values form over years and are not easily shifted by a single conversation or a warning. Recognizing the difference between a coachable behavior problem and a deeper incompatibility is one of the more useful judgments a manager or partner can develop. While you are waiting for a change that does not come, the cost is not only your time. The people around you who can see the situation clearly are also watching what you do about it. Extended inaction sends a signal that a serious mismatch in values is tolerable in your environment, and that tends to affect the culture in ways that are difficult to undo. Result? Many skills can be developed more readily than core values can be changed. Choose people with that in mind, and when serious misalignment becomes clear, address it promptly and fairly. Because the longer it continues, the more it costs, and the cost is spread across everyone who works alongside that person. Part 5. Systems Thinking. Rule 21. Think like a machine. Continuously refine yourself as a system. The rule: a person who never examines their own habits and routines tends to be run by them, rather than the other way around. Many people spend their days reacting rather than choosing. In the morning, whatever is urgent. During the day, whatever has piled up. In the evening, whatever is left. Ask such a person why they are doing what they are doing right now, and you will usually hear, "Because I have to," or "It just worked out that way." Not because this is the most effective path toward what I am trying to achieve. Just, this is what happened. Living this way feels normal until you stop and look at your actual results. You work long days, and your income does not move. You try to be a good partner, but the relationship does not improve. You read and attend courses, but nothing seems to change. The effort is real. The results do not match it. You probably know this feeling. You are busy. You are tired. It feels like you are working. But an honest look at a month or a year shows that the outcomes are not what you would expect given what went in. And instead of examining why, you simply continue. Harder, longer, more intensely. Because you have never looked at yourself as a set of habits and processes that can be examined and adjusted. Why it works. Think of a factory producing goods. Materials, energy, and labor go in. Finished products come out. If the output is poor or insufficient, a thoughtful owner does not simply tell the workers to try harder. They look at the process. Where is the breakdown occurring? At which point is time being lost? Which step is creating the problem? They find where the system is constrained and address that point. After that, the same factory with the same resources produces more and at higher quality, not through more effort, but through a better organized process. Human life is more complicated than a factory. Emotions, relationships, health, and circumstances that cannot be controlled all matter in ways no simple model captures. But the rough analogy is useful. You have inputs: time, energy, attention, money. You have outputs: results in work, health, relationships, finances. Between them are processes, habits, routines, how you make decisions, how you respond when things go wrong. When the results are not what you want, the problem is often in the processes, though inputs matter too. Sometimes people genuinely need more time, rest, or support, and that is worth acknowledging. But frequently, the issue is not scarcity of resources. Sometimes you also need to stop spending energy on low-value activities or to change a routine that has stopped working. Looking at yourself this way shifts how you interpret poor results. Instead of treating them as personal failure, you begin to see them as information. The result is not what you wanted, which means something in how you are operating may need adjusting. That is something that can be examined and changed without drama or self-punishment. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Once a month, set aside an hour to review how you have been operating. Write down your main goals, then list the specific actions you took over the past month, and assess honestly which of them moved you toward those goals and which simply filled time. 2. Identify 1 or 2 activities that consume a disproportionate amount of time for minimal return, and either cut them or change how you do them before adding anything new to your workload. 3. Track recurring decisions and their outcomes. If you make the same type of choice regularly about time, spending, how you respond to conflict, write the pattern down and assess whether it tends to produce good results or not. 4. When results disappoint, treat that as information rather than a verdict. The result is not what you wanted, which means something in your approach may have a problem worth finding. 5. After any significant success, examine which specific actions produced it and deliberately carry those into your regular practice so that good outcomes become more repeatable rather than occasional. Common mistake. When people hear about thinking like a machine, some respond by trying to suppress emotion and impose a rigid schedule on everything. Every hour planned, every deviation treated as failure. This is not systematic thinking. It is inflexibility, and it tends to collapse at the first unexpected disruption. Thinking like a machine does not mean becoming one. It means occasionally stepping back from your daily activity and looking at it from a slight distance. What is working, what is not, where your habits or routines may need adjusting. Emotions are not obstacles to this process. They remain part of your life. The point is not to eliminate them, but to avoid letting them do all the work of analysis. You feel frustrated by a result, which is understandable. Then, separately, you examine what actually happened and what might be done differently. This is a different approach from simply trying harder, or, equally, from concluding that it cannot be done. It is a third option. Not more effort in the same direction, not abandoning the goal, but a more honest look at which habits and routines are actually serving you. Result. When the results you are getting do not match the effort you are putting in, the answer is usually not simply to work more. It is to look at how you are working, at the habits, routines, and patterns that sit between your effort and your outcomes. One identified and corrected problem in how you operate can produce more change than months of additional effort aimed in the wrong direction. Rule 22. Build decision rules. Automate recurring situations. The rule. Every recurring problem solved from scratch is attention used on something that could have been settled once and reused. What's your typical day? From the moment you wake up, decisions start accumulating. What to wear, what to eat, when to leave, where to begin at work, how to respond to a colleague's message, whether to accept a meeting, how to handle a request that does not fit your schedule. Each one feels small. But by midday, you have made dozens of these, and a meaningful portion of your mental energy has gone into them. What makes this worth examining is that most of these decisions are not new. You have made them before, not once, but many times. The same types of situations, the same decision points, the same questions. And each time, you start from scratch, weighing, hesitating, deciding, as if for the first time. Then you wonder why, by evening, you have nothing left for the things that actually matter. Toward the end of the day, you may think less clearly, get irritated more easily, find yourself agreeing to things you would have declined in the morning. This may be one reason. Your attention has been depleted by decisions that could have been automated a long time ago. Why it works. Think of a pilot preparing for takeoff. Before every flight, they run through dozens of checks: engines, instruments, communication, fuel. Checklists reduce unnecessary deliberation while leaving room for judgment when it is genuinely needed. The pilot does not have to decide each time what to check and in what order. That was worked out in advance, in calm conditions. Their attention stays available for what actually requires real thinking, unusual situations, unexpected developments, anything outside the routine. Decision rules work the same way. When you have decided in advance, if a request comes in that is not connected to my priorities, I decline within the hour. You do not have to rework the tension between politeness and your own time on every occasion. When you have settled once, if a purchase exceeds a certain amount, I wait a day before deciding. You no longer have to fight the same impulse each time. The decision has already been made. You are applying it. This frees up a meaningful amount of attention, the same attention you can then direct toward things that genuinely require fresh thinking, new problems, difficult conversations, decisions that have not come up before. People who build rules for typical situations do not become less flexible. They tend to become more flexible where it matters, because they are no longer using that capacity on the predictable. What to do and how to apply it. 1. For 1 week, keep a note of every decision you make more than once, from small daily choices to recurring work situations. This will show you how much mental energy is going into things that could have been settled earlier. 2. For each type of recurring situation, write a simple rule in the form, if X happens, I do Y. For example, if someone proposes a meeting without a clear agenda, I ask for one before confirming. 3. Keep your rules in one place, a notebook, a document, a note on your phone, and refer to them until following them becomes habitual. 4. Start with 3 to 5 of the most frequent situations rather than trying to cover everything at once. A few rules you actually follow are worth more than a long list you ignore. 5. Every 3 months, review your rules. Circumstances change, and a rule that worked well 6 months ago may need updating to reflect what you have learned since. Common mistake. People tend to go wrong in one of 2 directions. Some resist decision rules because they feel like a constraint on freedom. Others become so enthusiastic that they try to turn every aspect of life into a formula, including situations that require genuine responsiveness and judgment. Neither serves well. A decision rule is not a restriction. It is a tool that handles predictable situations so that you are free for unpredictable ones. But if you start applying fixed rules to situations that are actually unique, a difficult personal conversation, an unusual problem, a moment that requires reading the situation rather than following a script. It can work worse than no rule at all. The useful distinction is between two types of situations: recurring, predictable, and typical, where a rule is exactly right, and unique, complex, or genuinely uncertain, where you need to actually think. A well-designed rule does not replace judgment. It reserves judgment for the cases that truly require it. That distinction tends to separate people who make consistently good decisions from those who exhaust themselves by treating everything with the same level of effort. Result: every recurring decision that has not been turned into a rule is a quiet drain on attention, one that reduces your effectiveness in the moments where it actually matters. Build rules for the predictable, and your thinking stays available for everything that genuinely deserves it. Rule 23. Think in probabilities, not guarantees. Manage risk sensibly. The rule: someone who waits for certainty before every decision is not being careful. They are postponing action until circumstances or someone else decide for them. Someone wants to change jobs. They are unhappy where they are. They can see other options. They know it is time to move. But they do not move, because there is no guarantee the new place will be better. What if it does not work out? What if the team is difficult? What if they regret it in 6 months? They wait for the moment when they will be completely sure, and keep waiting, staying not because the job is good, but because it is familiar. Another version: someone sees an opportunity that could significantly expand their business, but it carries risk. The investment is substantial, and the outcome is uncertain. They calculate, analyze, consult, and at some point realize that complete certainty will not arrive. Instead of making a decision under uncertainty, they step back. The opportunity goes to someone who was not looking for a guarantee, but for favorable enough odds. You probably recognize yourself in one of these situations. Something feels right, and then comes, what if it does not work? And that question freezes action. You stay, not because you decided to stay, but because you could not bring yourself to go. Waiting for complete certainty is a form of inaction dressed as caution. It feels like prudence, but it costs opportunities, time, and forward movement. Why it works. Many meaningful decisions involve a bet of some kind. The question is never whether risk exists. It does, in almost every significant choice. The question is whether the risk is justified given what you stand to gain and what you can afford to lose. Consider a simple game. You roll a die. If it lands on 1 through 5, you win 1,000. If it lands on 6, you lose 200. The odds are clearly favorable, but whether you should play also depends on whether losing 200 would seriously damage your situation. If it would, the calculation changes. Context always matters alongside the numbers. Most real decisions have a similar structure. There is a likelihood of things going well, a likelihood of things going badly, a potential gain, and a potential loss. When you start thinking in those terms, not will this work or not, but what are the rough odds and what do I lose if it goes wrong, your decisions tend to become more grounded. You stop looking for guarantees that do not exist and start assessing the actual shape of the situation. People who think in probabilities are not reckless. They simply do not confuse uncertainty with danger. Uncertainty is the normal state of most situations. Danger is a specific worst case that can be assessed and, to some degree, prepared for. Separating those two things tends to reduce the kind of fear that freezes decisions unnecessarily. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Before any significant decision, write down answers to 3 questions. What is the rough likelihood of a good outcome? What do I gain if it goes well? What do I lose if it goes badly? Seeing the risk clearly tends to make the decision less abstract and easier to think through. 2. Stop framing decisions as simple yes or no questions. Instead, ask, Under what conditions would I say yes, and under what conditions no? This shifts thinking from anxiety about the outcome toward analysis of the actual conditions. 3. Assess the realistic worst case, not the catastrophic imagined one, but what could plausibly happen, and ask, could I handle this? If the downside is manageable, the risk may be worth considering, though the upside and likely odds still matter. 4. Avoid putting everything on a single outcome. A bet that could eliminate your ability to continue is rarely justified, however attractive the odds look. Keep individual risks within a range where a bad result leaves you able to carry on. 5. After making a decision, record what probability you estimated and what actually happened. Over time, you will begin to see where your assessments tend to be too optimistic or too cautious, and you can adjust your judgment accordingly. Common mistake. Many people hear, "Do not look for guarantees," and conclude they should take every risk in front of them. That is the opposite of what this means. Thinking in probabilities does not mean jumping at everything. It means assessing each situation carefully before acting. Someone who ignores risk entirely tends to make costly errors. Someone who is paralyzed by any uncertainty tends to miss opportunities that were actually reasonable. The middle ground, assessing the odds and acting when they justify it, is not a dramatic posture. It is just a more honest way of making decisions. There is also a second mistake: overconfidence in your own probability estimates. Once you have assessed a situation and decided to act, it is easy to forget that your assessment itself might be off. Good risk management includes building in some margin for being wrong, assuming your estimate of the upside may be too optimistic, or that your sense of the downside may be too low. The best decisions do not require an accurate prediction of the future. They require being reasonably prepared for more than one way it might go. Result: guarantees rarely exist in any meaningful decision. Those who learn to assess odds honestly and act under uncertainty tend to make better choices over time than those who wait for full clarity, because full clarity does not arrive on demand, and the situations you are deliberating about do not stay open indefinitely. Rule 24. Synthesize information. Learn to see patterns, not just details. The rule: someone who sees only details may know a great deal, but still miss the larger meaning. Consider someone preparing a report. They gather data, verify every figure, build careful tables. A week later, they have a precise, thorough document. Their manager looks at it for 5 minutes and asks, "What does all this actually mean?" The person is stuck. They can explain every row, but they cannot say what trend the numbers reflect, what conclusion follows, what decision this points toward. They went deep into the details and never stepped back to interpret them. This happens outside of work too. Someone goes through 3 difficult relationships and treats each one as a separate story with its own particular causes, without noticing that in all 3, they chose a similar kind of partner and repeated the same behavior. An entrepreneur launches 4 projects, each of which fails for what seems like a different reason, without seeing that all 4 shared one underlying problem. They started each one without checking whether there was actual demand. An investor loses money in 3 different markets and explains each loss through its specific circumstances, without recognizing that each time they bought near the peak when optimism around them was at its highest. The details of each situation were genuinely different, but the structure repeated. And as long as you see only the details, you are likely to keep repeating the same mistakes in different settings. Why it works. Imagine standing in the middle of a large maze. You can see the walls on either side, the corridor ahead, a junction 10 steps away. You can memorize every turn, every dead end, every section you have covered. But you cannot see the structure of the maze. You do not know whether you have been circling back or getting closer to the exit. Now imagine stepping up onto an observation platform. You can see the whole layout. the dead ends, the loops, the most direct way out. You no longer need to remember every meter because you can see the shape of the thing. Though it is worth noting that even from above, the map may be incomplete and conditions on the ground can change. That is roughly what synthesizing information does. You do not discard the details, you step back from them and look for what repeats. What do these three situations have in common? What connects 5 events that seem unrelated on the surface? What is the underlying structure? Those questions tend to produce more useful answers than accumulating more detail. A single observation describes one case, a genuine pattern, one supported by repeated evidence and a plausible explanation, not just a feeling of resemblance, may suggest what the next case will look like. Someone who recognizes patterns does not only understand what has happened, they are better placed to anticipate what is likely to come. That is not available to someone who remains at the level of individual facts without looking for what connects them. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When facing a large amount of information, before going deeper, ask yourself, if I had to describe all of this in one sentence, what would I say? This pushes your thinking toward what matters rather than what merely happens to be there. 2. Regularly compare different situations from your experience and look for similarities. If you have encountered the same kind of problem 3 times, in work, in relationships, in money, ask what repeating element connects them. 3. After any significant event, write down not only what happened, but what it reminds you of from the past. Over time, you will begin to notice recurring structures that were previously invisible. 4. Practice moving between levels of perspective. When working through a specific problem, deliberately step back and ask, what kind of problem is this? Then return to the details with a better sense of what you are actually dealing with. 5. Turn observations into working principles. If you notice that decisions made under pressure consistently produce worse results, record that as a pattern and let it shape how you handle similar situations going forward. Common mistake. People who become enthusiastic about finding patterns sometimes begin to see structure where little or none exists. 2 similar events are not yet a pattern. They may be coincidence. A genuine pattern usually requires repeated evidence and a plausible explanation, not just a sense that things look alike. There is also the opposite error, becoming so focused on the general shape that the details stop receiving attention. Someone climbs to the observation platform, sees the layout of the maze, and assumes they no longer need to watch where they step. But conditions at ground level are not always visible from above, and overconfident generalizations tend to break down on contact with specific situations. Pattern finding without grounding in detail produces conclusions that float free of reality. Detail without any attempt to step back produces a pile of facts that is difficult to navigate. The useful capacity is being able to move between the two, going into specifics when precision matters, stepping back when the structure is what needs to be understood. Getting stuck at either level tends to leave half the picture invisible. Result: details tell you what happened. Patterns may suggest why it happened and what is likely to come next, though patterns point toward correlation rather than guaranteed cause. Developing the habit of stepping back from information to look for what repeats tends to produce decisions grounded in a clearer sense of the situation, rather than in isolated facts considered one at a time. Rule 25. Understand different levels. Move freely between details and the bigger picture. The rule: complex decisions made at only one level of thinking tend to miss causes or consequences that exist at another level. A manager notices that sales have dropped. They look at the monthly numbers, see the decline, and react. More advertising, a promotional offer, calls to clients. The following month, sales rise slightly, then fall again. When the situation is finally examined more carefully, the cause turns out to be something different. The market has shifted, customer needs have changed, competitors have moved in a new direction. The initial response addressed a symptom, while the underlying cause went untouched. The opposite version, a strategist has a clear view of the big picture. They understand trends, sense the direction of the market, generate ideas. But when it comes to execution, things fall apart because they never came down to the level of specifics. They did not check how the process would actually work. They did not notice that one key element of their plan was not feasible in practice. You probably recognize both types. Some people live in details. They handle current tasks with skill, but cannot see where things are heading. Others live in the big picture. They understand direction well, but keep colliding with reality because they have not thought through the concrete steps. Neither approach works on its own. What tends to work is the ability to shift between levels, the way an elevator moves between floors. From the ground floor, you see things that are invisible from above. From the top floor, you see things that are invisible from below. A decision that draws on both tends to be more accurate than one that draws on only one. Why it works. Think of a map of a city. Viewed from a satellite, you see the whole layout. Districts, rivers, main roads. But you cannot see the specific street you need, the one-way restrictions, the roadworks. If you zoom into a single block, you can see every building and alley, but you lose your sense of where you are and where your route is taking you. A navigation tool that lets you switch between scales instantly is more useful than one fixed at either end. Thinking that moves between levels works similarly. Any situation exists at several levels at once. A specific action is one level. The process it belongs to is another. The system within which that process operates is a third. The principle underlying the system is a fourth. When you are fixed at one level, you see only your particular scale. You might understand one neighborhood in detail while not knowing the whole area is in difficulty. Or you might see the area clearly while not knowing which specific problem needs attention first. Shifting between levels, looking at the overall logic and then checking whether the concrete steps actually support it, is often underdeveloped, but it can be practiced. Each deliberate shift tends to make the next one a little more natural. What to do and how to apply it. 1. When working on a specific problem, pause and ask, what larger process or system is this part of? That question often surfaces context that changes what the right response looks like. 2. When discussing strategy or general direction, come back to the concrete and check, how exactly would this work in practice? Who does what and when? An idea that cannot survive that question is not yet ready to act on. 3. Build the habit of moving through levels when analyzing a situation, specific fact to process to system to underlying principle, and then back down. Principle to system to process to concrete action. 4. If you find yourself stuck in details and unable to decide, step back and ask, what is my main goal in this situation? That question often cuts through the paralysis, because one option usually turns out to be closer to the goal than the others appear. 5. If your plans consistently break down during implementation, ask, what is the first specific step I will take tomorrow morning? If you cannot answer that, the plan exists only at the upper level and has not yet connected to the ground. Common mistake. Most people do not simply prefer one level. They tend to believe that their level is the correct one. Detail-oriented people often see strategists as disconnected from reality. Strategists often see detail-oriented people as unable to see past the immediate task. Both observations have some truth. Both miss the other side. The problem is not preferring one level. It is treating that preference as a complete approach. A manager who considers it beneath them to engage with specifics may find that their strategy failed because of a detail they chose not to look at. A specialist who dismisses broad discussions as vague may find that their careful work became irrelevant because the direction changed while they were not paying attention. Real capability does not lie in how deep you can go at one level. It lies in how readily you can move between them, and in accepting that your preferred level is one way of seeing the situation, not the whole of it. Result: reality is layered. Someone who can move between those layers is more likely to see both causes and consequences, both the specifics and the direction. Someone fixed at one level tends to make decisions that are inevitably incomplete, sound from where they are standing, but missing something visible from elsewhere. Part 6. Money and Life Wisdom. Rule 26. Diversification, one of the most reliable principles in investing and in life. The rule: a system that depends on a single element is vulnerable to collapse if that element fails. Someone puts all their savings into one asset, an apartment, shares in one company, their own business, because they are confident in it. The asset grows, and they feel vindicated. Spreading money around seems pointless when everything is working so well here. Then the market turns, or the business hits a crisis, or the tenants leave, and what seemed secure suddenly becomes a major loss. A version that is perhaps more common: someone builds their entire working life around one job. 20 years at one company, all their skills sharpened for one field, all their contacts are within one industry. The company closes, and they find themselves on the job market with no fallback, no adjacent skills, no network outside the world they knew. Or relationships. Someone channels their entire emotional life through one partner. Friends drift away, hobbies are abandoned, family is seen rarely. Then the relationship ends, and they are left with very little support around them, not because they cannot manage alone, but because they built a structure where everything rested on a single point. You probably recognize this tendency, if not in such extreme form, the pull toward putting everything in one place. When something is working, the instinct is to commit to it fully. But that instinct, taken too far, is precisely what creates the greatest vulnerability. Why it works. Think of a bridge as an analogy, not a proof. A bridge on one pier looks solid while that pier holds. A bridge on 10 piers can lose 1 or 2 and still stand, because the load is spread. No single pier is critical to the whole. Diversification works on a similar basis, not by making each element stronger, but by reducing the chance that any one failure brings everything down with it. In finance, this means a loss in one asset does not have to eliminate what you have built elsewhere. In professional life, a range of capabilities means that losing one job does not eliminate your ability to earn. In relationships, maintaining connections across different parts of your life means that losing one close tie does not leave you without support. In each area, the same underlying condition applies. The elements need to be genuinely independent of one another. 10 stocks in the same industry are not real diversification. 10 friends who all move in the same professional circles are not either. The value comes when a failure in one area does not automatically pull the others down, when the problems stay contained rather than spreading. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Audit your dependencies. Write down what each key area of your life, income, emotional support, professional standing, critically relies on. If any comes down to one name, one company, or one skill, that is worth examining. 2. In finances, avoid concentrating all your savings in one asset or narrow category. Spreading across things that do not move together reduces the impact of any single loss, though no arrangement eliminates risk entirely. 3. In professional life, develop at least one capability not tied to your main area. It does not need to be elaborate. It is a fallback for the situation where your primary field changes or contracts unexpectedly. 4. In relationships, maintain connections outside your closest circle, friends from different contexts, people from different fields. Each connection makes the overall network a little less fragile. 5. Ask yourself periodically, if the thing my situation currently depends on most disappeared tomorrow, what would remain? If the honest answer is very little, that is a prompt to start distributing. Common mistake. Many people hear diversify and think it means spreading yourself thin or abandoning focus. They say, better to be excellent at one thing than mediocre at 10. There is genuine truth in that. But focus and diversification address different questions. Focus determines where you put your greatest effort. Diversification determines how well you hold up if that strength becomes less available or less relevant. The two can coexist. There is also a subtler version of the mistake, diversification, that looks real but is not. Someone develops skills in 3 areas that all depend on the same industry, or maintains friendships across several groups that all operate in the same professional world. The surface looks distributed, but one disruption can still reach everything at once. What creates genuine resilience is independence between the elements, not simply their number. Quantity without independence is a version of concentration in disguise. Result: concentrating everything in one place is not strength. It is an exposure that has not yet been tested. Distribute your resources, skills, and connections so that no single failure can bring down the whole, and you build something that holds up under real pressure rather than only under favorable conditions. Rule 27. Study cycles carefully. Many patterns recur, and history points toward the future. The rule: someone who does not recognize cycles tends to treat every rise as permanent growth and every fall as permanent decline. A market rises for 3 years. People take out loans, buy property, pour money into stocks. Everyone around them is making money. Everyone is confident the growth will continue. The person who holds back seems irrational. Why wait when everything is going up? Then the market turns, prices fall, loans become unmanageable, portfolios lose value. The same people who were buying near the peak are now panicking. They sell at the bottom, lock in losses, and swear they will never invest again. 2 years later, the market begins to recover, and they are sitting on the sidelines, burned and convinced. This scenario has played out many times over the past century, and each time, many people experience it as though it is the first time. But this is not only about money. Careers follow similar rhythms: rapid growth, then a plateau, then a drop in motivation, then a new phase, if the person did not give up during the difficult stretch. Relationships move through comparable stages: intensity, stability, crisis, and either renewal or breakdown. Even mood tends to be cyclical. Periods of energy give way to periods of fatigue and back again. Most people do not notice this rhythm. In good times, they assume things will stay that way. In bad times, they feel certain that nothing will improve. They are reacting from inside the cycle, without recognizing it as a cycle. Why it works. Imagine someone who has never seen the sea. They watch the water rising toward their feet, become frightened, and step back, certain the ocean is advancing permanently. When the tide goes out, they relax. When it comes back in, they panic again. Someone who knows about tides does not react this way. They do not celebrate low tide as a victory or treat the incoming tide as a crisis. They understand the rhythm and act within it, moving to higher ground when necessary, making the most of calmer conditions when they exist. Understanding cycles offers 2 practical advantages. The first is a degree of emotional stability. When you recognize that a downturn is more likely a phase than a permanent state, you are less likely to make decisions you will later regret. Selling at the bottom, walking away from a difficult relationship at its worst moment, or abandoning a project during its hardest stretch. The second is practical positioning. If you recognize that long expansions tend to be followed by contractions, you can prepare while conditions are still favorable, building reserves, reducing exposure, strengthening your position. Some of the best opportunities appear not at the peak of a cycle, but near its bottom, when most people are too frightened to act. That said, broad markets have often recovered historically, but individual assets and sectors may not. And recovery in careers or relationships is not automatic. It depends on the underlying conditions. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Study the history of whatever area matters most to you. Finance, career, relationships. Find examples of past cycles and pay attention to how similar phases recurred with different details, but comparable underlying structure. 2. Try to identify which phase you are currently in. Strong confidence that conditions will continue as they are, or deep conviction that nothing will improve, are both worth examining more carefully against the actual evidence. Neither feeling reliably indicates your position in a cycle. 3. Avoid making major decisions at the emotional extremes. Do not commit heavily when feeling most confident, and do not exit when feeling most desperate. These are the moments when perception tends to be most distorted. 4. Build financial, physical, and emotional reserves during periods when things are going well. Do not spend all your resources in good times. A harder period will come, and those with something in reserve tend to get through it without lasting damage. 5. When those around you are panicking, ask, has something like this happened before, and how did it resolve? Often, something similar has occurred. Study how it ended and what conditions mattered, rather than assuming the outcome will necessarily be the same. Common mistake. Many people confuse understanding cycles with predicting their exact timing. They say, I know a correction is coming, or I am waiting for the right moment, and spend years on the sidelines trying to identify the precise turning point. But cycles do not run on a fixed schedule. They have a recognizable structure, but no timetable. Knowing that a change in conditions is likely does not tell you when it will arrive. Trying to catch the exact moment of reversal tends not to work, and spending energy on it usually means missing the more useful task, acting well within whatever phase has already arrived. During a rise, reduce vulnerability to the eventual correction. During a fall, look for what might become valuable when conditions improve. Not by guessing when the turn will come, but by positioning yourself so that either outcome is manageable. Someone who prepares for both directions tends to do better across the full cycle than someone waiting for perfect timing, who often misses the move entirely. Result: many things in life move in recognizable patterns: economies, careers, relationships, energy. Someone who can identify the pattern they are in is less likely to be caught entirely off guard by the next phase, and more likely to act in ways that hold up over time rather than only when conditions are favorable. Rule 28. Understand how things work. Economies, organizations, and you operate like machines. The rule: someone who does not understand how the system they are operating in actually works tends to leave their results largely to chance. Someone opens a business, they sell a product, hire people, spend money on advertising. Some things work and some do not. When things go well, they conclude they have found the formula. When things go badly, they blame circumstances, but ask them, why did that particular customer buy? Which part of the advertising actually worked? Why does one employee produce results while another does not? And they cannot answer precisely. They can see the outcomes. They cannot see what is producing them. Another version: someone wants to get into better shape. They start training, adjust what they eat, try different approaches. Some things produce results and some do not. Each result is as mysterious as the last, because they have never examined how their body actually responds to exercise, food, or rest. They are adjusting inputs without understanding the system that processes them. A more personal example: someone repeatedly ends up in conflict with colleagues and concludes they are simply unlucky with people. But when each conflict is examined step by step, the same sequence appears every time. They take on responsibility that belongs to others, stay quiet, accumulate frustration, and eventually reach a breaking point. This is not bad luck. It is a repeating causal chain they have never looked at directly. In all of these cases, the problem is the same. The person observes outcomes but has not examined what produces them. They press buttons and sometimes get what they want, but they do not know what connects the button to the result. So they cannot reliably repeat a success or anticipate a failure. Why it works. Many things can be understood more clearly if you look for their underlying mechanisms. The image of a machine is imperfect. People, relationships, and organizations are more complex and less predictable than any piece of equipment. But the basic logic is useful. Imagine being handed control of a complex machine without having read the manual. You try things at random and sometimes get the result you wanted. You note that a certain approach seems to work, but the next day it does not, because the outcome depended not on that one action, but on a combination of factors you had not noticed. Without understanding the mechanism, your actions remain guesswork. If you take time to understand how the machine is built, which settings affect which outcomes and how they interact, your actions become more deliberate. The result becomes more predictable. You can repeat it and improve it. The same logic applies in broader contexts. An economy involves money, credit, production, and consumption, all connected in ways that often produce effects elsewhere when one part shifts, though not always predictably, given the psychology, politics, and external shocks involved. An organization's results depend not only on individual talent, but on how people, roles, and incentives interact. And you yourself operate through habits, reactions, and patterns of decision-making whose results are shaped by how those elements actually work together, not just by what you intend. When you understand how something is built, you can begin to influence it. When you do not, the outcomes tend to be determined by factors you have not examined. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Every time you get a result, good or bad, ask yourself, what specific sequence of actions led to this? Write down the answer, even if it is incomplete. The habit of tracing causes develops the ability to see them more clearly over time. 2. When entering a new area, business, health, relationships, spend time understanding the basic structure before acting. What are the key elements? How are they connected? And what tends to affect what? 3. Draw simple diagrams, input to process to output, for any situation you want to understand better. Putting it on paper forces the mind to organize what feels chaotic and often reveals connections that were not visible before. 4. When something produces an unexpected result, do not stop at the first explanation. Ask why, at least 3 times in sequence to move from the visible symptom toward the underlying mechanism. 5. Test your understanding by making predictions. If you genuinely understand how something works, you should be able to say, if I do X, Y will follow. If Y does not follow, your model is incomplete and needs revising. Common mistake. Many people substitute pattern recognition for genuine understanding. They notice, when I do A, B usually happens, and conclude they understand the system. But a correlation is not a cause. There may be a third factor driving both that they have not identified. B may be happening despite A rather than because of it. The relationship may hold only under conditions that are about to change. Someone who has memorized a pattern without understanding the underlying mechanism is like a person who notices that things tend to go well on the days they wear a particular shirt. They have noted something, but they do not know why. And when conditions shift, the observation becomes useless. Deeper understanding means being able to describe the causal chain. Not just A leads to B, but A leads to B because A sets off process C, which affects element D, and D produces result B. That kind of understanding is more likely to hold up in new situations because it is based on how the thing works, not just on what it has done before. Result. Most results have causes worth examining. even when the full mechanism is hard to know. Someone who develops the habit of looking for those causes gains a measure of deliberate influence over outcomes. Someone who observes only the results without examining what produces them tends to stay dependent on circumstances they have not thought through. Rule 29. Don't try to predict the future, prepare for different scenarios. The rule: a plan built around one version of the future tends to break down the moment reality unfolds differently, which it often does. Someone writes a business plan with a single trajectory: 20% sales growth per year, profitability in 18 months, expansion in 3 years. The numbers look reasonable, the market seems to support them. They commit all their resources to this one line, and a year later discover that things unfolded differently. Not catastrophically, just not as expected. The customers came, but not the ones anticipated. Growth happened, but in a different segment. Costs ran higher and timelines ran longer than forecast. A plan built precisely for one scenario became much less useful when the actual situation did not follow it. Another version: someone maps out their career. Promotion in 2 years, a leadership role in 5, their own project in 10. Every decision is organized around this single path. Then the company restructures. The industry goes through a difficult period, or they discover they want something entirely different. The sequence falls apart, not because it was poorly constructed, but because it was the only one they had. You have probably had plans that looked solid and did not work out, not because of faulty reasoning or lack of effort, but because reality contained more variables than the forecast accounted for. Someone who builds everything around a single prediction is placing a large bet on one outcome, even when that outcome seems likely. Why it works. Imagine preparing for a journey. You check the forecast and pack only for what is predicted. Sunny weather, so light clothes only. If the forecast is right, fine. If it rains, you get wet. If the temperature drops, you are cold. Now imagine packing a jacket and an umbrella alongside the light clothes. You are not trying to guess what will happen. You are prepared for several possibilities. Whatever the weather, you have something appropriate available. Scenario thinking works on the same basis. You do not abandon planning. You abandon the assumption that your plan will accurately predict what happens. Instead of one plan, you develop several, built around different possible outcomes. What will I do if things go well? If they go moderately well? If they go badly? If something I was not expecting occurs at all? Each scenario does not need to be fully detailed. A general direction and 2 or 3 first steps is enough. Having several options changes your position in a practical way. You are less dependent on any single outcome. When reality departs from your forecast, you have less improvising to do, because you have already thought through at least some of what might come next. And you can respond faster than someone who only ever planned one way. Flexibility in this sense does not mean having no direction. It means having more than one route toward the same destination and being prepared to use a different one when the first is blocked. What to do and how to apply it. 1. For every significant decision or project, develop at least 3 scenarios: optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic. For each, write down the first concrete steps you would take if that version materialized. 2. Before starting any major undertaking, ask yourself, what will I do if my main assumption turns out to be wrong? If you have no answer, you are not yet fully prepared to begin. 3. Do not commit all your resources to one outcome. Keep financial reserves, extra time, and emotional capacity in reserve, enough to allow a change of direction without serious damage. 4. Revisit your plans regularly as new information arrives. A scenario that seemed unlikely 3 months ago may be the most plausible one today. Update your picture rather than defending the version you started with. 5. Practice scenario thinking on small decisions. If this meeting is cancelled, how will I use the time? If this person says no, who do I approach next? The habit of having a fallback tends to carry over into larger decisions as well. Common mistake. Many people interpret preparing for multiple scenarios as a lack of conviction. They feel that real decisiveness means committing to one direction and not wavering, that a backup plan signals doubt, that thinking about unwelcome outcomes somehow attracts them. This misunderstands what decisiveness actually requires. It is not commitment to a single forecast. It is the ability to act quickly under whatever conditions actually arise. Having prepared scenarios makes that possible, because when reality produces a surprise, you have less need to recover from the shock before responding. You have already thought through at least some of what might happen. Some significant failures in business and in personal life happened not because people failed to plan, but because they planned for only one outcome. When that outcome did not materialize, what remained was improvisation under pressure, which tends to produce poor decisions. Someone who has prepared multiple scenarios has less improvising to do when things go sideways. They can switch to the next approach without losing time to confusion. Result: the future cannot be predicted reliably. But preparation does not require prediction. It requires thinking through more than one possibility in advance. Build several plans built around different possible outcomes, and for many unexpected developments, you will already have a next step ready rather than having to find one under pressure. Rule 30. Share knowledge generously. Teaching others helps you learn. The rule: knowledge you have never explained to anyone tends to stay shallow. It is in the act of explaining that it becomes genuinely yours. Some people accumulate a great deal of knowledge but keep it to themselves, not out of selfishness, but from a sense that they need to gather more before sharing anything, or from a worry that if others learn what they know, those people will get ahead, or simply from habit, they learn for themselves and do not think about passing anything on. They read, attend courses, gather experience, and all of it stays inside. Over time, something gradual happens. Knowledge that once felt solid begins to blur. Details fade. Conclusions lose their sharpness. What once felt like clear understanding becomes a vague sense that you knew this once but can no longer explain it. You have probably experienced this. You read a book. A month later, you remember only the general impression. You complete a course. 6 months later, you cannot reproduce the key ideas. You go through a valuable experience, but cannot find the words for what you actually learned. Knowledge that has never been explained to someone else tends to remain fragile. It lives in you as a feeling, rather than as something you can use with precision. And when it is actually needed, for a decision, an argument, a specific action, you find you cannot draw on it reliably. Meanwhile, the people around you could be helped by your experience right now. A colleague repeating a mistake you already worked through. A friend facing a decision you have already figured out. Someone less experienced spending months on something you mastered in a week, and you say nothing. Both of you lose something in the process. Why it works. Imagine you have assembled a 1,000-piece puzzle. The picture is in front of you. You can see it whole. Now try to explain to someone else how to assemble it. You will quickly find that seeing the finished picture and being able to explain how it comes together are entirely different things. To explain it, you have to work out the logic. Which pieces come first? Which depend on others? Where the key junctions are? Where it is easy to go wrong? In the process of working that out for someone else, you understand the puzzle more deeply than you did when you were simply looking at the completed image. Teaching requires you to do things that consuming knowledge on your own does not. Structure it, simplify it without distorting it, find precise language, and answer questions you would not have thought to ask yourself. Each of these is a test of your understanding. If you can explain an idea clearly without losing its meaning, you probably understand it well. If you cannot, what you had was probably the feeling of understanding, not understanding itself. There is also a broader effect. When you share knowledge, people around you often share in return. You explain something. Someone asks a question you had not considered, and in finding the answer, you discover something you had not seen before. Sharing tends not to be a loss. It is closer to a multiplication, at least in most contexts. What to do and how to apply it. 1. Each time you learn something valuable, from a book, an experience, or a conversation, find at least one person it might help and tell them within the next few days while the learning is still fresh. 2. Try explaining your core professional knowledge to someone from a completely different field. If they follow it, without you having to distort it, you genuinely know your material. If not, that is a prompt to develop your understanding further. 3. Get into the habit of recording what you know in useful forms for others. Short notes, reference documents, guidance for people who are new to something. The act of writing it down tends to deepen understanding as much as the record itself does. 4. When a colleague or acquaintance asks you a question, resist the urge to answer briefly and move on. Use it as an opportunity to examine and reinforce your own understanding through a fuller explanation. 5. Share your mistakes as well as your conclusions. Explaining where you went wrong helps others avoid the same path, and tends to consolidate the lessons you took from it in a way that simply remembering them does not. Common mistake. Many people think of sharing knowledge as a one-way act of generosity. You give, others receive, and you are left with less. Or they fear that sharing will cost them a competitive advantage. Someone thinks, if I teach this colleague, they may take my place. Or, my experience is my capital. I should not give it away. This concern rests on a mistaken model that knowledge depletes when shared, as a physical resource does. In most cases, it does not. Someone who helps colleagues develop a skill has not lost their own. They have often deepened it through the process of explanation. They may earn a reputation as someone worth going to for knowledge, which tends to be a durable professional asset. That said, there are situations where discretion matters. Trade knowledge that is genuinely proprietary, sensitive personal information, or anything shared in confidence. Generous sharing is not the same as sharing indiscriminately. The judgment about what is appropriate to share is part of the practice. Keeping everything to themselves does not protect a position so much as gradually isolate it. Someone who never shares tends to become indispensable in a narrow and fragile way, not because they are valued, but because no one else has been allowed to learn anything from them. That does not build trust, or the kind of professional relationships that hold up over time. Result: knowledge you explain tends to become clearer and more reliable than knowledge you simply carry around. Share what you know with appropriate judgment about context, and you will often find that teaching others is one of the more effective ways to understand something better yourself. Conclusion. 30 rules. Not 30 separate recommendations to be chosen from at random, but a set of principles meant to reinforce one another, each one connected to the others and drawing strength from them. Accepting reality leads to an accurate reading of a situation. An accurate reading reveals the real problems. Real problems, examined honestly, become experience. Experience, recorded as a principle, becomes a tool. A tool applied consistently changes the quality of decisions. The quality of decisions helps shape the quality of a life. The rules are meant to work this way, not in isolation, but together. You have read this book. Now there is a choice in front of you, and that choice will determine whether these principles stay on the page or enter your daily practice. The first option: close the book, agree that the rules are reasonable, and return to the habitual ways of thinking and acting. The knowledge stays knowledge. The decisions stay the same. The results do not change, because nothing is done differently. The second option: take one rule, the one that affected you most strongly, and apply it today, not tomorrow, not when the right situation appears. Today, look at the problem you have been avoiding. Write down the conclusion that has been forming for a while, but has never been put into words. Ask the question you have been putting off. Seek out the opinion of someone who thinks differently. Begin somewhere specific. Understanding alone does not create change. Action does. You can study a map for years and never move. You can take one step in the right direction and find that the next step becomes visible. Clear thinking, sound decisions, the ability to see a situation without distortion. These are not innate traits available only to certain people. They are the result of specific principles applied consistently day after day. Each rule put into practice makes the next decision a little sharper. Each day without practice leaves you roughly where you were the day before. The principles are here. What happens next is up to you. If you found this book useful, you may want to explore the other collections in the Golden Rules series. Each one brings together the central ideas from influential books, distilled into a form you can put to use.
Thank you for listening until the very end. If you enjoyed this audiobook, support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new releases.